My husband left me to come home from surgery alone on a cold November night and never came back. 9 days later, when I stopped answering, he asked the housekeeper where his wife was. What she said brought him to his knees. My name is Zara. I am 34 years old, and I survived the ultimate betrayal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who took your loyalty for granted. The first thing that registered was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Then came the pain. It tore through my abdomen like jagged glass, a brutal reminder of the major tumor removal surgery I had just endured. I forced my heavy eyelids open, squinting against the harsh, sterile fluorescent lights of the hospital room. The wall clock read 2 in the morning. My mouth tasted like dry cotton and anesthetic. I tried to shift my weight, but a sharp agony radiated from my incision, stealing my breath entirely. I turned my head slowly, expecting to see Derek sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl recliner next to my bed. He had promised to be there when I woke up. He had held my hand right before the anesthesia pulled me under, whispering that everything would be fine and that he would not leave my side. The recliner was empty. A cold knot formed in my stomach, distinct from the surgical pain. I scanned the dim room. Derek's dark wool jacket was gone. His leather laptop bag was gone. The half-empty coffee cup he had been holding hours ago was sitting abandoned on the windowsill. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the bright screen. No missed calls, no voicemails, just a single brief text message sent yesterday afternoon. It read, "Emergency at the firm, had to step out. Call you later." That was it. I had just undergone a life-altering medical procedure, and my husband of 7 years left a 10-word text message. Panic and confusion battled for dominance in my foggy brain. I pressed the nurse call button, gripping the plastic remote tightly. Within moments, a nurse named Sarah pushed through the heavy wooden door. She had kind eyes but wore an expression of deep sympathy that immediately set me on edge. "Where is my husband?" I asked, my voice cracking and raspy from the breathing tube they had used during surgery. Sarah stopped at the foot of my bed, her gaze dropping to her clipboard before meeting my eyes again. "Zara, your husband signed your preliminary discharge papers yesterday afternoon. He told the surgical team he was taking you home as soon as you woke up." My mind struggled to process her words. Yesterday afternoon? How long have I been asleep? "There were complications with the anesthesia," Sarah explained gently. "You were unresponsive longer than expected. We had to monitor you closely in recovery before moving you to this room. But your husband did not stay. He finalized the paperwork around 3 o'clock yesterday. But where did he go?" I demanded, pushing myself up slightly and gasping as the stitches pulled against my skin. "Did he say there was a work emergency?" Sarah hesitated. It was the kind of hesitation that precedes terrible news. She walked over to my bedside and adjusted my thin hospital blanket, refusing to look me in the eye. "He did not mention a work emergency to the staff. Actually, he seemed to be in very high spirits. He left the ward laughing while his wife was unconscious and struggling to wake up from major surgery." The knot in my stomach twisted into something sharp and poisonous. "Who was he with?" I asked the question, slipping out before I could stop it. I did not know why I asked it, but a primal instinct deep within me demanded the truth. Sarah bit her lip. "I am so sorry, Zara. I assumed she was a relative. He left with a blonde white woman." They walked out to the elevator together, holding hands. She was carrying his coat. The hospital room seemed to spin violently. A blonde white woman. Derek worked in wealth management, surrounded by wealthy clients, but my mind instantly snapped to one specific person. Chloe. My brother Trey's wife. A woman who always found excuses to touch Derek's arm at family dinners, who laughed too loud at his jokes, who used her white privilege to manipulate my family while giving me condescending smiles. I had brushed off her behavior for years, telling myself I was being paranoid. I had trusted my husband. I had trusted my brother's choice in a partner. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a freight train. Derek was not at the office handling a financial crisis. He had abandoned me at my most vulnerable moment to be with my sister-in-law. He had literally left me bleeding on a hospital bed to go play house with another woman. "You need to rest," Sarah urged, seeing the monitor spike as my heart rate accelerated. "I can page the on-call doctor for more pain medication." "No," I said, my voice suddenly devoid of any weakness. "I am leaving." "Zara, you just had a tumor removed from your abdomen." Sarah protested, her eyes widening in alarm. "You cannot leave at 2 in the morning. You need proper observation." "Your husband signed the papers, but the doctor needs to officially clear you." I threw the blanket off my legs, gritting my teeth against the searing, tearing sensation in my gut. My husband signed the discharge papers, which means I am legally free to walk out that door. I need my clothes, now. Every movement was pure agony. It felt as though someone was dragging a serrated blade across my stomach. Sarah tried to stop me, pleading with me to wait until sunrise, but she could not physically restrain me. She reluctantly handed me the plastic bag containing the clothes I had worn to the hospital. Dressing myself took 15 excruciating minutes. Pulling my sweatpants over my swollen, bandaged abdomen brought tears of pure pain to my eyes. I could feel a warm dampness spreading beneath the thick gauze. I was bleeding. I did not care. I needed to get out of that room. I needed to escape the pity in the nurse's eyes. I ordered a ride share on my phone, my thumb slipping on the screen. The wait time was 20 minutes. I forced myself to stand, gripping the heavy IV pole for support, until Sarah unhooked me. She insisted on bringing a wheelchair to take me down to the lobby. I sat in it silently, my posture rigid, my mind racing through 1,000 terrible scenarios. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open, and the freezing November wind hit my face like a physical blow. It was 30 degrees outside. I shivered violently, crossing my arms over my chest to protect my incision. The black sedan pulled up to the curb. I rejected Sarah's offer to help me into the car, forcing myself to stand and slide into the back seat under my own power. The driver confirmed my address, and the car pulled away from the brightly lit hospital entrance into the dark, silent streets of the city. I sat in the back, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. My body was broken, but my mind was sharpening into a deadly, focused weapon. Derek thought he could leave me to suffer alone. He thought I was weak. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. The black sedan pulled to a halt at the edge of my driveway. The driver kept the engine running, clearly eager to leave the quiet, affluent neighborhood. I handed him a folded $50 bill, refusing his half-hearted offer to help me to the door. Every step I took toward the imposing front door of my own home felt like walking on broken glass. The November wind whipped fiercely around my ankles, biting through the thin fabric of my sweatpants. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so violently that I dropped them twice on the frozen concrete porch. When the heavy mahogany door finally yielded, I stumbled inside. The house was suffocatingly dark and completely silent. Derek had not even left a light on for me. He had not adjusted the thermostat. The air inside held a bitter chill, matching the temperature outside. I leaned heavily against the entryway console, clutching my abdomen. A warm, sticky sensation was rapidly spreading across my midsection. I looked down. Dark crimson blood was seeping through the gray fabric of my sweatpants, pooling rapidly. I tried to call out, but my voice failed, coming out as a weak, raspy gasp. My knees buckled. I braced myself for the impact of the hardwood floor. A strong pair of arms caught me before I hit the ground. Rosa. My housekeeper, my confidant, and the only person in this sprawling house who possessed a shred of genuine loyalty. She had been staying in the guest quarters, waiting for us to return from the hospital. Miss Zara Rosa gasped, her voice thick with panic and her heavy accent slipping through. "What happened? Where is Mr. Derek? Why are you bleeding?" She did not wait for my answers. Rosa practically carried me to the living room, laying me gently onto the massive leather sofa. She barked orders into the empty house as if Derek might magically appear, but quickly realized we were entirely alone. Rosa sprinted to the downstairs bathroom and returned with a first aid kit, clean towels, and a basin of warm water. She worked with the precision of a seasoned nurse, cutting away my ruined clothes to expose the surgical site. The stitches had torn slightly under the strain of my unauthorized exit from the hospital. Rosa applied pressure, her warm hands steadying my trembling body. She muttered fierce curses in Spanish, her eyes blazing with a maternal fury I had never received from my actual mother. "He left me Rosa," I whispered, staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling. "He left me at the hospital to go be with Chloe." Rosa froze. The wet towel in her hand hovered over my wound. She knew exactly who Chloe was. Everyone in my life knew who Chloe was. My brother Trey had married her 3 years ago, bringing a privileged, entitled white woman into our proud, hard-working black family. Chloe had immediately positioned herself as the fragile, delicate center of the universe, demanding endless financial and emotional support from my parents and my brother. Rosa's jaw tightened. She pressed the fresh gauze against my skin with renewed determination. "That man is a fool and a snake," Rosa stated firmly, taping down the thick bandages. "You are a queen, Miss Zara. You do not cry for snakes, you crush them." Before I could respond to her fierce loyalty, a sharp, piercing ring shattered the silence of the living room. My phone was vibrating on the coffee table. The screen lit up in the darkness. The caller ID displayed one word: Mother. Rosa looked at the phone, then at my bleeding stomach. "Do not answer that," she warned. "You need rest. Your body is fighting a war." But my mind was already fighting a different kind of war. I needed to know. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot in my life truly went. I reached for the phone and swiped the green button, bringing the speaker to my ear. "Zara, finally." My mother's voice boomed through the receiver. It was sharp, demanding, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. "I have been trying to reach Derek all morning, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." I lay there, clutching my freshly bandaged stomach. Not a single question about my surgery. Not a single inquiry about the tumor they had just cut out of my body. She knew my procedure was scheduled for yesterday morning. She knew the risks. "I am home, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I just walked through the door." "Good, then you can handle this directly." She did not skip a beat. "You missed the transfer date, Zara. Trey's business loan payment is due tomorrow. You promised to send the $10,000 by the 15th. Your brother is incredibly stressed right now, and you know how that affects his blood pressure." I closed my eyes. The absurdity of the situation washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I was bleeding on a sofa at 3 in the morning, abandoned by my husband, and my mother was calling to collect a debt from my grown, able-bodied brother. "I just had major surgery, Mother," I whispered, testing the waters, giving her one last chance to be a parent. "Oh, please, Zara," my mother scoffed impatiently. "You have always been strong as an ox. You black women in our family, we are built for endurance. You will bounce back in a day." "But Chloe is so terribly upset about the finances. You know how delicate she is. She comes from a different background, Zara. She is not used to this kind of financial instability. Her fair skin breaks out in hives when she is stressed. We cannot have her dealing with this anxiety while she is trying to decorate their new nursery." The words hit me harder than the electrical shock of the surgeon's scalpel. It was the same toxic, colorist narrative I had endured my entire life. I was the dark-skinned, strong, independent daughter who was expected to bear every burden, fund every mistake, and swallow every insult. I was the mule. Chloe, with her blonde hair, blue eyes, and weaponized fragility, was the prize. My mother, a black woman herself, worshipped the ground Chloe walked on, bending over backward to accommodate a white woman who secretly despised our entire culture. My mother was literally demanding that I bleeding and betrayed finance the comfortable lifestyle of the very woman who was currently sleeping with my husband. "Zara, are you listening to me?" My mother snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "Chloe saw a vintage crib she absolutely loves. Trey needs that transfer processed by 8 in the morning. Do not be selfish right now. Your career is doing fine. You have more than enough money to help your brother's family thrive." I looked at Rosa. The housekeeper was staring at me, her eyes wide with disbelief as she listened to the muffled shouting from the phone speaker. Rosa gently placed a warm blanket over my shaking shoulders. The warmth grounded me. It tethered me to reality. The grief that had been threatening to drown me suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. "I am not being selfish, Mother," I said softly. My voice was no longer trembling. It was steady, hard, and devoid of any daughterly affection. "I am just restructuring my investments." Restructuring. What does that mean? Just send the money, Zara. Do not make me call Derek to handle this. Derek is unavailable, I replied, my eyes fixed on the dark ceiling. And so is the money. Trey will have to figure out how to buy that vintage crib himself. Tell Chloe she needs to learn how to handle stress. Before my mother could unleash the furious tirade I knew was building in her lungs, I pressed the red button. The call ended. The silence returned to the living room, heavy and absolute. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table. The last thread tethering me to my toxic bloodline had just been severed by my own mother's hand. Rosa sat on the edge of the coffee table watching me closely. She did not offer empty platitudes. She did not tell me everything would be okay. She simply wiped the remaining blood from her hands and waited for my command. I sat up slowly, ignoring the protest of my torn muscles. The pain was irrelevant now. It was just a biological response. My mind was operating on a completely different frequency. They thought I was just the reliable workhorse. They thought I was a blind, obedient cash cow who would silently fund their luxurious, deceitful lives. Derek thought he could discard me. Chloe thought she could replace me. My family thought they could exploit me. Rosa, I said, my voice echoing in the empty freezing house. Bring me my laptop. It is time to cut the blood supply. Rosa did not question me. She gave a single firm nod and turned toward the hallway to fetch my work bag. As she pivoted, her foot caught the edge of the heavy area rug beneath the leather sofa. She bent down to smooth the fabric, her hand sweeping under the low clearance of the furniture. She stopped. Her brow furrowed as she reached deeper into the dark crevice. A second later, she pulled out a sleek silver electronic device. It was an expensive tablet encased in a magnetic leather cover. Derek always bragged about having the latest technology. He must have shoved it under the sofa in a frantic rush while packing his overnight bag for the hospital. Rosa handed the cold metal device to me. My fingers traced the smooth edge. Derek was a man of predictable vanity. He used the same 6-digit passcode for everything, the date of his first major corporate promotion. He considered it his lucky number. I typed the digits onto the glowing screen. The device unlocked instantly, bypassing the home screen and opening directly into a hidden encrypted messaging application. My eyes locked onto the name displayed in bold letters at the top of the chat thread. Chloe. My heart stopped beating for a fraction of a second. I stared at the bright screen, willing my eyes to make sense of the words. This was not a business conversation. This was not a friendly exchange between a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law. The messages were a vile, explicit timeline of a prolonged affair. The betrayal was not just a dagger in my back. It was a twisting, serrated blade meant to gut me completely. Derek was sleeping with Chloe, the very woman my mother worshipped, the woman my brother Trey aggressively protected against any perceived slight. I scrolled upward, my thumb moving with mechanical precision. The physical agony of my torn surgical stitches vanished, entirely suppressed by the sheer adrenaline flooding my veins. I read messages dating back months. Chloe complaining about Trey being financially inadequate. Derek promising to elevate her lifestyle. They mocked my brother. They mocked my mother's pathetic desperation to please a white daughter-in-law. And then they mocked me. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the messages sent yesterday morning. The exact hours when I was lying on an operating table having a tumor carved out of my abdomen. Chloe had sent a text at 10 in the morning. Is she under yet? The realtor will not hold the viewing past 4 in the afternoon. We cannot miss this property. It has the exact marble countertops I want. Derek replied 20 minutes later. She is in surgery. I just told the nurses I had a work emergency and preemptively signed her preliminary discharge papers. They will keep her heavily sedated for observation anyway. I am leaving the hospital now. I will pick you up in 20 minutes. Get ready to go see our new dream house. Our new dream house. I read the words again and again. While I was bleeding under the bright surgical lights, my husband was abandoning me to go house hunting with my brother's wife. They were picking out marble countertops while the doctors were cutting into my flesh. The sheer audacity, the absolute lack of human decency, left a metallic taste in my mouth. They had planned this down to the minute. Derek had orchestrated my premature discharge solely to ensure he had enough time to tour a luxury property with his mistress before the real estate agent left for the day. Rosa stood silently beside the sofa watching my face. She did not need to see the screen to know what I had found. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The air grew heavy, thick with the toxicity of the secrets unspooling in my hands. I kept scrolling. The evidence was a goldmine of legal destruction. Derek had sent Chloe links to luxury furniture stores, discussing how they would furnish the master bedroom. He promised her a life free from the suffocating expectations of my family. He promised her my money. Yes, my money. Because Derek was a financial advisor on paper, but I was the unseen engine behind our wealth. I let him play the role of the primary breadwinner to satisfy his fragile male ego. I allowed my family to believe Derek was the successful savior who elevated my status. In reality, my underground commercial real estate investments funded every extravagant vacation, every luxury car lease, and every designer suit Derek wore. He was a parasite feeding off my silent empire. And now, he was trying to funnel my resources to a woman who openly despised my existence. I looked at the date stamp on the most recent message. It was sent just hours ago, right around the time I was waking up alone in the hospital. Chloe had texted a photo of herself holding a glass of champagne in a massive empty living room with floor-to-ceiling windows. The caption read, "We did it. The offer is accepted." Derek had replied with a heart emoji. "I will handle Zara. The divorce will be clean. She is too focused on her career to fight me on the assets. I will secure the funds by next week." A low, dark laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound devoid of joy, echoing strangely against the bare walls of the living room. Rosa stepped back slightly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron. "Miss Zara," Rosa asked, her voice cautious, "what did you find?" "I found the blueprint to their execution, Rosa," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing screen. "Derek is sleeping with Chloe. They left me at the hospital to buy a house together." Rosa gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. "Chloe, Mr. Trey's wife, the one your mother treats like a saint." "The very same," I replied, turning off the tablet screen and placing it carefully on the glass coffee table. It was no longer just an electronic device. It was the murder weapon they had foolishly handed to me. My mind began constructing the counter-offensive. Derek wanted a clean divorce. Chloe wanted a marble kitchen. My mother wanted to extract my wealth to fund Trey's failing endeavors. They all viewed me as an endless, mindless resource to be drained and discarded. But they made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that I controlled the board. "Bring me the laptop, Rosa." I repeated the command, my voice slicing through the cold air. "The tablet gives us the motive. The laptop gives us the ammunition." Rosa hurried down the hallway, returning seconds later with my heavy black work bag. She unzipped it and handed me the sleek computer. I flipped it open, ignoring the sharp protest of my torn abdominal muscles. Pain was a distraction for the weak. I had an empire to protect and traitors to annihilate. I booted up the encrypted servers. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room, casting sharp shadows against the walls. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Every keystroke from this moment forward would be a calculated strike against the foundation of Derek's stolen life. He wanted to buy a house with my money. I would make sure he could not even afford a cardboard box. The master password required a dual authentication process. I bypassed the standard security protocols using a biometric scan and a specialized encryption key token I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out lip balm container in my purse. The screen blinked twice before displaying the central dashboard of my financial portal. I navigated straight to the primary joint savings account, a high-yield portfolio I maintained specifically as a decoy to keep Derek satisfied and oblivious to my actual offshore wealth. The balance usually sat comfortably at $300,000. Tonight, the bright red digits displayed a meager $412. My eyes locked onto the transaction ledger. There was a single massive outbound wire transfer initiated yesterday at exactly 1:15 in the afternoon. The timestamp lined up perfectly with the moment I was being wheeled into the recovery room, still heavily sedated and fighting for my life. The destination of the wire was a premier escrow account registered to a luxury real estate brokerage in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The amount was a staggering $250,000. Derek had liquidated our entire liquid safety net to secure a down payment for Chloe. He had stolen $250,000 while I was bleeding on a surgical table. Rosa stood silently behind the sofa, watching the glow of the screen reflect against my face. She let out a sharp, disgusted breath, her hands clenching into tight fists. I did not stop there. Derek was an arrogant wealth manager, but he was painfully sloppy compared to my standard of operation. He underestimated the proprietary tracking software I had installed on our shared home network. I accessed the underlying data packets of his recent browsing history and pulled the pending contract for the luxury cabin. The PDF file loaded onto my screen, revealing the financing terms of his little romantic getaway. The $250,000 only covered the initial down payment. The remaining balance required substantial collateral to secure the loan. My eyes scanned the digital document, searching for the collateral clause. When I found it, the air in my lungs turned to ice. Listed on the official bank document as the primary collateral for the loan was my own address. The sprawling custom-built estate we were currently standing in. Derek had forged my digital signature using a fake power of attorney document to leverage my marital home. If he defaulted on his payments for Chloe's mountain retreat, the bank would foreclose on the roof over my head. He had literally wagered my physical sanctuary to finance his treason. A normal woman would have screamed. A normal woman would have hurled the heavy laptop across the room, shattering the screen into 1,000 pieces and dissolved into a puddle of uncontrollable tears. I felt absolutely no urge to cry. The physical agony radiating from my torn surgical stitches was entirely eclipsed by the glacial, terrifying calm settling over my mind. Derek had not just cheated on me. He had attempted to leave me destitute, homeless, and broken. I had handed my financial security to my brother's entitled white wife, a woman who viewed our family as a stepping stone for her own elevation. "Miss Zara, do you need me to call the police?" Rosa asked, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "This is theft. This is a major crime. The police are too slow, Rosa," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "The justice system is designed to delay and mediate. I do not want mediation. I want total annihilation." I reached for my phone on the coffee table and dialed a number saved in my contacts under a single letter. It was 3:30 in the morning. A shark does not sleep. The line rang only twice before a sharp, fully awake voice answered the call. "Call. Speak," Evelyn commanded. Evelyn was the most ruthless corporate attorney in the city. She was a formidable, brilliant black woman who had carved her way to the apex of the legal food chain by destroying arrogant men in tailored suits. She was prohibitively expensive, utterly devoid of mercy, and exactly the weapon I required for this war. "Derek has initiated a financial hemorrhage," I said, keeping my tone strictly professional. "He wired $250,000 from the joint savings into a real estate escrow account yesterday afternoon. He also forged my signature on a power of attorney to use my primary residence as collateral for the remaining mortgage balance. The beneficiary of the property is Chloe." A low, menacing chuckle vibrated through the phone speaker. Evelyn possessed a terrifying laugh. It was the sound a predator made right before snapping its jaws shut. "Your husband is a monumental idiot," Evelyn stated flatly. "He just handed us his own head on a silver platter. He committed wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny all in a single afternoon. How do you want to play this, Zara? Do we freeze him out, or do we let him hang himself further? I want the escrow account frozen immediately." I instructed, my fingers flying across my laptop keyboard as I initiated a mass download of the evidentiary files. File an emergency injunction before the real estate transaction clears the final banking hurdles at dawn. Trap the stolen money in legal limbo. Chloe gets no cabin and Derek defaults on his promise to his mistress by sunrise. Consider it done. Evelyn replied, the sound of her own keyboard clacking rapidly in the background. "I will have a judge sign the emergency order by 6 in the morning. What about the marital home? Draft the paperwork to contest the fraudulent lien," I ordered. "But Evelyn, I want to prepare the corporate guillotine." Derek's precious wealth management firm currently leases their flagship downtown office from a holding company. I own that holding company. Review the morality and criminal conduct clauses in their commercial lease agreement. Evelyn let out an impressed hum. If we prove he committed felony wire fraud, we can trigger the immediate eviction clause for his entire firm. He will not just lose his job, he will be responsible for his entire company being thrown onto the street. Zara, are you physically all right? You sound strained. I am bleeding on my sofa from a torn surgical incision, I replied coldly. But my mind has never been sharper. I am sending you the encrypted files now. Evelyn did not offer useless sympathy. She understood the assignment. I will have my private forensic accounting team tear his entire professional history to shreds before breakfast. Lock down everything else on your end. Do not leave him a single penny. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the glass table. I turned my attention back to the master control panel of my hidden assets. I initiated a comprehensive, uncompromising lockdown. I highlighted every secondary credit card attached to my name and flagged them as stolen. I accessed the joint checking accounts and reported severe fraudulent activity, prompting the bank's automated security system to freeze the remaining funds instantly. I watched the green active icons on my screen turn a solid, unforgiving red. Derek was currently sleeping comfortably beside Chloe, dreaming of marble countertops and a new life funded by my blood and sweat. He was completely unaware that his financial oxygen supply had just been permanently severed. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. The screen went black, plunging the room back into shadows. The counterattack was officially in motion. Day 3 arrived with a bitter, relentless chill pressing against the frost-covered windows of my living room. The physical agony of my torn surgical stitches had finally subsided into a dull, manageable throb, contained only by sheer willpower and Rosa's meticulous round-the-clock care. I sat upright on the leather sofa, a thick cashmere throw draped over my legs, staring at the dark, silent screen of my television. The counterattack was in motion, but the waiting required a different kind of endurance. My phone vibrated against the glass coffee table, shattering the absolute silence of the house. A video call request flashed across the bright screen. The caller ID displayed my brother's name, Trey. I stared at the flashing icon. Today was the annual family Thanksgiving dinner. I had informed my parents weeks ago about my major tumor removal surgery. I had explained the severity of the procedure and the necessary recovery time. Yet the only communication I had received from my mother since I was discharged was a vicious demand for money to fund Trey's lifestyle. I took a slow, deep breath, adjusted the collar of my silk robe to completely hide the thick white bandages wrapped around my abdomen, and painted a flawless, serene smile onto my face before answering the call. The screen flickered to life, revealing the bustling, overly decorated dining room of my parents' house. The loud noise of clinking silverware and overlapping joyful conversations flooded my quiet sanctuary. Trey was holding his phone high, capturing the entire family sitting around the massive mahogany table. And there they were, Derek and Chloe. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their bodies angled toward each other, with an intimacy that made my stomach physically churn. Derek wore the custom-tailored navy cashmere sweater I had bought him for our 7th anniversary. Chloe was wearing a pristine white silk dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled in loose waves, throwing her head back and laughing loudly at something Derek had just whispered into her ear. They looked like a picture-perfect couple in a luxury lifestyle magazine. Trey sat right across from them, completely oblivious, smiling like an absolute fool as he watched his white wife openly flirt with his brother-in-law. My mother's face suddenly filled the frame, aggressively pushing Trey aside to commandeer the screen. "Zara!" She snapped, her tone dripping with loud, performative disappointment designed for the entire table to hear. "I cannot believe you chose to skip Thanksgiving dinner for some vague corporate work project. Look at poor Derek here, forced to celebrate the holidays like a lonely bachelor because his wife is married to her computer." I kept my pleasant smile locked firmly in place. My mother did not mention my tumor. She did not mention the major surgery I had undergone just 72 hours ago. To her, my severe medical crisis was an inconvenient fiction she chose to completely ignore because it disrupted her perfect, joyful family tableau. Derek has been an absolute angel helping Chloe set up the new dining spread. My mother continued panning the phone camera back to the two traders sitting at the table. Chloe is completely exhausted from managing the household, you know. She has such a delicate constitution. Derek even carved the turkey for her because Trey is terrible with a carving knife. You really need to learn how to prioritize your husband, Zara. A man needs a warm, accommodating woman, not a harsh, aggressive bank statement. You black women with your masculine ambition always end up driving good men away. You should take notes from Chloe on how to be soft and graceful. The toxic colorist venom flowed from my mother's mouth with practiced ease. She worshipped the ground her white daughter-in-law walked on, bending over backward to accommodate a woman who brought absolutely nothing to our family but entitlement. My mother was berating me, the dark-skinned daughter, who literally paid the mortgage on the house she was standing in, who funded the very turkey sitting on that mahogany table, all to elevate the woman who was actively sleeping with my husband. I watched Derek look directly into the camera lens. He offered me a practiced, deeply sympathetic smile. "We miss you, honey," he lied smoothly, his hand resting casually on the back of Chloe's chair, his fingers brushing against her blonde hair. "Take your time with your project. We are holding down the fort here. I will bring you a plate of leftovers tonight." The sheer, unadulterated sociopathy required to sit at my family's table, eat their food and smile at me while actively trying to steal my home and my hidden fortune was staggering. Chloe leaned into the frame, offering a sweet, condescending pout. "We really wish you were here, Zara. Derek has been so helpful with my real estate stress. Looking for a new property is just so exhausting, but he gives the best advice." She was taunting me. She was openly flaunting the luxury cabin Derek had used my marital home to finance, confident that I was completely blind to their treason. Trey took the phone back, his face filling the screen. "Yeah, Zara. Zara, you are missing out. Chloe made her special cranberry sauce. Derek looks happier than I have seen him in months. You are lucky he is so patient with your cold attitude." My left hand rested on my lap, hidden entirely from the camera's view beneath the cashmere throw. My secondary mobile device, a secure encrypted phone. Derek knew absolutely nothing about SAT securely under my palm. A text message from Evelyn had just arrived. The screen lit up against my leg. "The emergency injunction on the escrow account is finalized. The commercial lease termination for his wealth management firm is drafted and stamped by the city clerk. Say the word." I looked at the video screen. I looked at my mother's scowling, judgmental face, my brother's ignorant, arrogant grin, Chloe's smug, entitled satisfaction, and Derek's deceitful, confident eyes. They were a collective parasite feeding off my endless labor while actively conspiring to destroy my life and leave me with nothing. They thought they had outsmarted the workhorse. They thought they had successfully drained the well. I tapped the screen of my hidden phone, typing a single definitive word to my ruthless corporate lawyer. "Execute." "I am so incredibly glad you are all having such a wonderful time together," I said smoothly into the video call, my voice dripping with honeyed poison. "Derek, I am thrilled you are enjoying yourself today. You deserve exactly what is coming to you. Chloe, make sure you cherish this meal and your new real estate ventures. Things are going to get very hectic for you both." They nodded, entirely missing the lethal, uncompromising promise wrapped inside my pleasant words. Derek even winked at the camera and blew me a dramatic kiss. I blew one back, knowing with absolute certainty it was the last time he would ever smile in my presence. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the table. Rosa walked into the living room holding a tray with my pain medication and a cup of hot tea. She looked at the blank television screen, then down at my calm face. The trap was sprung. The corporate guillotine was dropping and the bloodbath was about to begin. Exactly 45 minutes after I ended that infuriating video call, a sleek black town car pulled into my driveway. The heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed through the freezing November air. Rosa rushed to the entryway, pulling open the mahogany door before the doorbell even rang. Evelyn swept into my foyer like a beautifully tailored storm. She wore a pristine emerald green trench coat over a sharp black suit, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with military precision. Evelyn did not do casual, and she certainly did not do holidays. While my toxic family was busy stuffing themselves with turkey and deceit, My attorney was armed with briefcases full of financial destruction. She handed her coat to Rosa with a brisk nod and marched straight into the living room, her dark eyes locking onto my bandaged abdomen before meeting my gaze. "You look like you fought a war and crawled out of the trenches," Evelyn stated, setting her heavy leather briefcase onto the glass coffee table. "But your financial portfolio looks like a masterclass in covert operations. I spent the last 3 hours tearing through the encrypted files you sent me. Zara, you are a terrifying woman, and I mean that as the highest compliment." I adjusted the cashmere throw over my legs and offered a tight, humorless smile. Derek always assumed I was just a highly paid corporate consultant. I explained, watching Evelyn extract stacks of thick legal documents. He needed to feel like the dominant provider. He needed to believe his wealth management firm was the absolute center of our financial universe. My mother raised me to cater to the fragile male ego, constantly reminding me that a successful black woman must shrink herself so her man can stand tall. So I played the part of the supportive, submissive wife. I let him brag at expensive dinner parties. I let him take credit for our luxurious lifestyle. But I never let him see the actual vault. Evelyn laid out 3 separate folders, each color-coded for maximum efficiency. She tapped her manicured fingernail against the thickest file. Derek prides himself on being a senior partner at Vanguard Financial Partners. They occupy the top 3 floors of the premier commercial high-rise downtown. It is the most coveted real estate in the city, boasting panoramic views, private elevators, and elite security. He loves bringing clients there to showcase his immense power and undeniable success. Evelyn paused, a wicked gleam flashing in her dark eyes. What Derek does not know, and what absolutely blew my mind when I traced the shell companies this morning, is that Vanguard Financial Partners does not own that building. They lease it from an anonymous holding company called Apex Holdings LLC. I leaned forward, ignoring the sharp pull of my surgical stitches. Apex Holdings is mine. I registered it 6 years ago through a proxy firm in Delaware. I bought that commercial building when it was undervalued, renovated it using my own capital, and then approved the lease agreement when Derek's firm applied for the space. My husband goes to work every single day, sits in his massive corner office, looks out over the city skyline, and pays his monthly rent directly into my secret bank account. He is literally my tenant. Rosa, who was standing quietly by the doorway, holding a fresh pot of herbal tea, let out a low gasp. Evelyn leaned back against the sofa cushions, shaking her head in pure admiration. "It is poetry," Evelyn declared. "Pure, unadulterated poetry. But here is where it becomes a total bloodbath." Evelyn opened the file and slid a highly dense legal contract across the glass table. Vanguard Financial Partners signed an ironclad commercial lease with Apex Holdings. As the landlord, you insisted on a very specific morality and criminal conduct clause. If any senior partner at Vanguard is found to be engaged in financial crimes, felony fraud, or embezzlement, the landlord has the unilateral right to terminate the entire corporate lease immediately. Not in 30 days, not in 60 days, immediately. The clause was originally designed to protect the building's prestige, but tonight, it is our guillotine. Derek committed wire fraud yesterday. He electronically stole $250,000 from your joint accounts to fund Chloe's luxury cabin crossing state lines and triggering federal banking alerts. By executing this illegal transfer, using his corporate laptop, and routing it through his firm's secure banking portal, Derek fundamentally breached the morality clause of the lease. I stared at the paperwork. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity was almost difficult to comprehend. I was so blinded by his lust for my brother's entitled white wife, so intoxicated by his own perceived brilliance, that he left a digital trail connecting his personal theft directly to his professional standing. "We are not just firing Derek," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper. "By signing this document, you are initiating a brutal, immediate eviction process against the entire firm. Vanguard Financial Partners will lose their headquarters by Monday morning. The board of directors will be locked out of their own offices. The fallout will be catastrophic, and they will know exactly who caused it. Derek will be held personally and financially liable by his own billionaire partners for destroying their company operations." Evelyn handed me a heavy gold fountain pen. She pointed to the bottom of the eviction mandate. He thought he could steal your home to build a love nest for Chloe. Now you get to take away his professional home and burn his career to ashes. Sign on the dotted line, Zara. Let the landlord speak. I took the pen. The cold metal felt grounding and heavy in my hand. I thought about the fake Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about my mother demanding my money to support the woman who was currently sleeping with my husband. I thought about Chloe sitting there in her pristine silk dress, laughing at me while spending my stolen wealth. I thought about the years of suppressing my own brilliance to make a mediocre man feel important. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed the pen to the thick paper and signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes. The black ink bled into the page, cementing the total destruction of Derek's entire universe. I pushed the signed document back to Evelyn. Serve the eviction notice at dawn, I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Contact the building security team tonight. Instruct them to deactivate the keycards for every single employee at Vanguard Financial. Send the board of directors a certified copy of Derek's fraudulent wire transfer, along with the legal notice that their senior partner is the sole reason they are being thrown out onto the street. Let his own colleagues tear him to pieces before the federal investigators even arrive. Evelyn gathered the signed papers, securing them back inside her leather briefcase. She stood up, smoothing the front of her suit. The wheels are turning, Zara. By the time Derek wakes up from his romantic holiday weekend with Chloe, his keycard will be dead, his firm will be homeless, and his billionaire partners will be hunting him down for corporate sabotage. Enjoy your rest. You have earned it. Rosa handed Evelyn her emerald coat. As the fierce lawyer walked out into the freezing night, I leaned back against the sofa cushions. The physical pain in my stomach was completely neutralized by the intoxicating rush of absolute power. My husband and my family had desperately tried to bury me in the dark. They forgot that seeds need the dark to grow into something strong enough to crack concrete. 2 days passed in a blur of glowing screens and encrypted phone calls. By the dawn of the 5th day, my sprawling house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a tactical war room. The adrenaline that had initially fueled my counterattack was beginning to wear thin, replaced by a deep, bone-chilling exhaustion. I had not slept for more than 40 minutes at a time. Every waking second was consumed by securing my assets, severing financial ties, and coordinating with Evelyn to ensure Derek and Chloe would be left with absolutely nothing. I sat perched on a high stool at the massive marble kitchen island, surrounded by stacks of printed ledgers and glowing monitors. My body was screaming for rest. The heavy painkillers prescribed by the hospital remained untouched in their orange plastic bottles on the counter. I refused to take them. Narcotics clouded the mind, and I needed my intellect to remain razor-sharp. Derek was navigating the world with the blissful ignorance of a man who believed he had won. I was orchestrating a symphony of destruction, and the conductor could not afford to be sedated. I reached across the wide expanse of the marble island to grab a heavily redacted commercial real estate contract. It was a simple, mundane movement. It was a movement I had executed 1,000 times before. But my body, ravaged by major tumor removal surgery less than a week prior, finally rebelled against the relentless abuse. As I stretched my torso, a sound like thick canvas ripping violently echoed in my ears. It was not an external noise. The sound came from deep inside my own abdomen. A blinding white-hot flash of pure agony exploded through my midsection. It was a pain so absolute, so entirely consuming, that my vision instantly went black at the edges. I gasped, unable to draw oxygen into my lungs. My hand flew to my stomach, clutching the thick layers of medical gauze hidden beneath my silk robe. The fabric was already warm. It was wet. I collapsed forward against the cold marble of the kitchen island, sending a stack of financial documents crashing to the hardwood floor. A low, guttural groan forced its way out of my throat. The internal stitches holding my muscle tissue together had just given way. Rosa was in the adjoining laundry room. She heard the heavy thud of the binders hitting the floor and came running. Her footsteps slapped urgently against the tiles. When she rounded the corner and saw me slumped over the counter clutching my bleeding stomach, she dropped the basket of clean towels she was carrying. Miss Zara Rosa shrieked, rushing to my side. She grabbed my shoulders, trying to haul me upright. I groaned again, my nails biting into the smooth stone countertop. I tore it. I managed to whisper, my voice cracking from the sheer intensity of the pain. The incision. It ripped open. Rosa gently pulled back the lapels of my robe. The thick white surgical bandages were completely saturated with fresh dark blood. The crimson stain was expanding rapidly, dripping down the side of my stomach and spotting the pristine marble surface of the island. The wound was not just seeping anymore, it was hemorrhaging. I am calling an ambulance right now, Rosa declared, her hands trembling as she reached into her apron pocket for her mobile phone. You are losing too much blood. You need a surgeon immediately. I shot my hand out, gripping her wrist with surprising, desperate strength. My nails dug into her skin. No, I commanded, my voice raw and desperate. No hospitals, Rosa. Put the phone down. Put the... Miss Zara, you are bleeding to death in your kitchen, Rosa shouted back, tears springing to her eyes. This is not a game. Your internal stitches are ruptured. I cannot fix this with a first aid kit. I am calling 911. I yanked her wrist closer, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. Listen to me very carefully, I hissed, fighting through another wave of excruciating pain. The premium health insurance policy covering my surgery is a joint account. Derek is the primary policy holder. If I am admitted to an emergency room, the hospital administration will swipe that card. The insurance provider will automatically send an emergency SMS alert directly to his phone. Rosa froze, her thumb hovering over the keypad. He will get a notification that his wife has been admitted to the trauma ward. I continued, my breathing shallow and ragged. He thinks I am still heavily sedated and recovering peacefully at the hospital he abandoned me in. If he gets an alert today, he will know I checked myself out. He will know I am awake, active, and unsupervised. He will panic. He will call the bank to check on the cabin down payment. He will see the frozen accounts before Evelyn executes the final trap. The entire element of surprise will be destroyed. I will not let him win because of a bleeding wound. Put the phone down. Rosa stared at me, horrified by the sheer, unadulterated madness of my logic. She looked at the blood pooling on the marble, then back at my pale, sweating face. She saw the absolute, unyielding resolve burning in my eyes. I would rather bleed out on this kitchen floor than give Derek the opportunity to escape the financial slaughterhouse I had built for him. Rosa shoved her phone back into her apron. She let out a heavy, shuddering breath and switched instantly from a panicked housekeeper into a battlefield medic. You are a stubborn, crazy woman, Rosa muttered fiercely. Hold on to the counter. Do not move. She sprinted to the downstairs bathroom and returned carrying a heavy-duty emergency medical kit, a bottle of high-grade rubbing alcohol, and several clean, sterile towels. She cleared the financial documents off the kitchen island with one swift sweep of her arm, creating a makeshift operating table. Lie back, Rosa instructed, her voice brokering no argument. I carefully leaned backward, lying flat against the cold, hard marble surface. Staring up at the modern chandelier hanging from the ceiling, I braced myself for what was coming. Rosa cut away the ruined, blood-soaked bandages with surgical scissors. The cold air hit the open wound, sending a violent shiver through my entire body. This is going to hurt more than the surgery, Rosa warned, soaking a thick gauze pad in rubbing alcohol. Bite down on this. She rolled up a clean hand towel and pressed it against my mouth. I clamped my teeth down onto the thick cotton. Rosa pressed the alcohol-soaked gauze directly into the ruptured incision. A scream ripped through my throat, muffled entirely by the towel. My back arched completely off the marble island. My hands slammed down onto the stone fingers, curling into tight, white-knuckled fists. The pain was absolute fire. It felt like acid was being poured directly into my open flesh. My vision swam with dark spots and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Rosa did not hesitate. She worked with brutal efficiency. She cleaned the surrounding tissue, clearing away the fresh blood to expose the torn skin. She pulled out sterile butterfly closures from the medical kit, pulling the jagged edges of my flesh back together by sheer force. She taped them down tightly, securing the temporary closure with thick strips of surgical adhesive. I kept my eyes locked on the crystal prisms of the chandelier above me. I focused every ounce of my willpower on the image of Derek's face when he realized he had lost everything. I thought about Chloe being thrown out of her luxury cabin. I thought about my mother's demanding voice. I channeled every drop of betrayal, every ounce of humiliation, and forged it into pure physical endurance. My mind detached from the agony of my body. I was no longer a victim bleeding on a counter. I was an executioner enduring the cost of war. Rosa applied a fresh, massive layer of thick gauze pads over the tightly bound wound-wrapping medical tape firmly around my waist to secure the makeshift dressing. She stepped back, her chest heaving, her hands covered in my blood. "It is closed." Rosa panted, wiping sweat from her own forehead. "The bleeding is contained for now. But you cannot move, you cannot stretch. You sit on that sofa, and you do not move a single muscle until this war of yours is over. Do you understand me?" I spat the towel out of my mouth. It was damp with my own sweat and saliva. I took a deep, shuddering breath, feeling the tight, burning pull of the butterfly closures holding my body together. The crisis was averted. The digital trap remained entirely hidden in the shadows. Derek was still completely blind. "I understand, Rosa," I whispered, my voice exhausted but undeniably triumphant. I slowly turned my head to look at the digital clock glowing on the microwave display. The countdown was still ticking. The physical breaking point had come and gone, and I had survived it without surrendering an inch of ground. My flesh was torn, but my empire remained untouchable. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, and prepared for the next phase of the slaughter. The steady rhythm of my heartbeat served as a metronome for the war drums echoing in my mind. The morning sun crept through the sheer curtains of my living room, casting long, sharp shadows across the hardwood floor. My body was securely bound in layers of thick medical tape and fresh gauze, but my focus remained absolute. The digital clock on my laptop read 8 in the morning. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table, breaking the heavy silence. It was an incoming text message from Derek. "Rosa, I need my charcoal suit and 3 fresh shirts dropped off at the office by 10. I have back-to-back meetings all day. Do not disturb Zara. Let her sleep." I stared at the glowing text. Derek was so entirely consumed by his own arrogance that he used my personal housekeeper as his private courier, commanding her through my phone while pretending to care about my surgical recovery. He believed he was the master of his universe, moving pieces on a chessboard while I lay sedated in the dark. He had no idea I was the one controlling the board. Rosa walked into the room carrying a silver tray with a glass of water and my untouched pain medication. She read the message over my shoulder, her jaw set into a hard, unforgiving line. "I will pack his clothes," Rosa said, her tone dripping with absolute contempt. "I will gladly hand-deliver them to his office." "No," I replied, my voice cool and calculating. "You are not just delivering clothes today, Rosa. You are delivering a Trojan horse." I gestured for her to hand me my work bag. My movements were slow, carefully restricted to prevent any strain on my freshly sealed incision. I unzipped a hidden compartment in the lining and extracted a small matte black device, no larger than a standard coin. It was a high-grade military-caliber digital audio transmitter. I occasionally used them during highly sensitive corporate acquisitions to record verbal agreements in hostile boardrooms. The device transmitted a live, encrypted audio feed directly to a secure cloud server accessed exclusively through my laptop. I activated the transmitter, a tiny green light flashing once before going completely dark to ensure total discretion. I held the cold metal device out to Rosa. "Derek carries a custom Italian leather briefcase," I instructed softly. "He always leaves the secondary interior zipper open because the clasp is slightly damaged. Slip this device deep into the lining of that pocket." People like Derek suffer from a very specific type of blindness. They do not see the help. To him, you are just part of the background scenery. He will not look twice at you while you hang his suits in his office closet. Use that invisibility. Rosa took the transmitter, her fingers closing tightly around the small metal disc. She did not express fear or hesitation. She offered a sharp, determined nod. "He will not see a thing, Miss Zara." An hour later, I sat perfectly still on my leather sofa, my noise-canceling headphones secured tightly over my ears. The laptop screen displayed a digital audio waveform, currently registering the low ambient hum of a corporate office environment. I tracked Rosa's progress entirely through sound. I heard the distinct chime of the executive elevator. I heard the muffled greetings of the receptionist at Vanguard Financial Partners. I heard the heavy, solid thud of Derek's solid oak office door swinging open. "Ah, Rosa, just hang them in the closet." Derek's voice filtered through the audio feed, dripping with a condescending, dismissive tone. "I am expecting a very important client in 5 minutes. Make it quick." I heard the rustle of plastic garment bags. I heard Rosa's quiet, submissive footsteps moving across the carpet. Then came the soft, metallic slide of a zipper. The audio waveform spiked slightly, then settled back into a clear, crisp transmission as Rosa successfully planted the device into the deep recesses of his briefcase. A moment later, the office door clicked shut. Rosa was out. The infiltration was flawless. I waited, listening to the rhythmic tapping of Derek's fingers against his mahogany desk. Exactly 4 minutes later, the office door opened again. The heavy, measured footsteps of a corporate client did not enter the room. Instead, the sharp, distinctive click of expensive Christian Louboutin heels echoed across the hardwood floor. "Lock the door," a woman commanded. It was Chloe. My brother's wife had strutted right past the reception desk and straight into my husband's private executive office. The audacity was breathtaking. I leaned closer to the screen, my hands resting lightly on my bandaged stomach. "I locked it," Derek replied, his voice dropping into a sickeningly smooth, intimate register. "You look incredible in that dress. Are we celebrating our new real estate acquisition?" Chloe let out a high melodic laugh that instantly made my skin crawl. "Of course we are celebrating. I just spent the entire morning listening to Trey complain about his new business venture. It is completely suffocating. He talks about expanding his logistics company, but he has no actual liquid capital. He is broke, Derek. He wants to live like a king, but he refuses to understand how real wealth operates. I cannot stand listening to him pretend to be a mogul when I know you are the one who actually controls the money." I closed my eyes, absorbing the vile, racist undertones of her complaint. Chloe, a white woman who had married into a wealthy black family purely for financial elevation, openly despised the very man who worked relentlessly to provide for her. Trey worshipped her, defending her against every critique, isolating himself from our family to ensure her comfort. And here she was standing in his brother-in-law's office, mocking his ambition. "You do not have to worry about Trey's lack of capital ever again," Derek stated, his voice swelling with bloated, arrogant pride. "He is a fool playing at business. In fact, he handed me his entire expansion fund to manage last month. He transferred $600,000 into my advisory accounts, begging me to double his returns." The audio waveform jumped as Chloe gasped. "600,000, Derek? What are you going to do with it?" Derek chuckled, the sound thick with pure, unadulterated malice. "I am doing exactly what a brilliant financial advisor does. I am diversifying. I created a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands last week. I am currently siphoning 30% of Trey's capital right off the top and funneling it into an offshore account bearing my name. He is so desperate for my validation, so eager to prove he belongs in the elite financial circle, that he does not even read the quarterly reports I send him." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over my living room. I stared at the audio feed, my mind racing to process the sheer magnitude of the crime. Derek was not just cheating on me with my sister-in-law. He was actively, systematically robbing my brother blind. He was stealing Trey's business expansion capital to fund his illicit new life with Trey's own wife. By the time Trey realizes his money is gone, Derek bragged, the sound of ice clinking in a crystal glass echoing through the transmitter. "We will be sitting on the deck of our new mountain cabin, sipping bourbon and watching the sunset. He is financing our escape, Chloe. He is paying for us to leave him behind." Chloe laughed again, a cruel, sharp sound. "You are a genius, Derek. Trey is going to lose his mind when he finds out." I reached out and clicked the red square on my screen, terminating the live feed. I immediately saved the massive audio file, duplicating it across 3 separate, highly encrypted offshore servers. The physical pain in my stomach was entirely forgotten. I had just been handed the most destructive, lethal weapon imaginable. Trey had insulted me. He had defended Chloe's honor while criticizing my dedication to my career. He believed his white wife and his successful brother-in-law were the ultimate prize. Now I held the undeniable, irrefutable proof that his prized wife and his trusted advisor were financially and romantically slaughtering him. The weapon was fully armed. The safety was off. I disconnected my headphones, staring at the saved audio file sitting on my desktop. The inside job was a total success, and Derek had just signed his own death warrant. The morning of day 7 arrived with a sharp, biting frost against the windows. My physical wounds were healing beneath the tightly bound gauze, but my mind was operating at terminal velocity. I sat at my marble kitchen island, a fresh cup of black coffee steaming next to my laptop. The audio file from Derek's office was securely locked in multiple offshore servers, a digital bomb waiting for the perfect moment to detonate. But today was not about the audio. Today was about cutting the oxygen supply. I opened my encrypted financial portal. The dashboard loaded, displaying the vast, intricate web of accounts, corporate lines of credit, and secondary cards I allowed Derek to use. For years I had maintained the illusion that he was a self-made king. I let him carry the heavy metal black cards. I let him sign the receipts at expensive dinners. I let him believe his wealth management salary funded our lavish lifestyle. It was all a carefully constructed theater. Every piece of plastic in his wallet was directly tethered to my primary assets. I selected the first account on the screen. It was an unlimited premium credit card he used for his daily extravagant expenses. I clicked the security tab, selected the option for severe fraudulent activity, and initiated a permanent lock. I moved to the next account, a corporate line of credit registered to a subsidiary holding company I owned, which he frequently used to entertain clients. I triggered an immediate freeze, citing an active corporate fraud investigation. I did not stop there. I systematically went through every single financial artery connecting Derek to my wealth. Savings accounts, checking accounts, emergency overdraft lines. All of them turned from active green to a dead, unforgiving red. I picked up my phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. "The financial guillotine has dropped," I informed her, my voice echoing coldly in the empty kitchen. "Every card in his wallet is officially dead plastic. Have your forensic team flag the accounts explicitly under the code for massive corporate embezzlement. When he calls the bank, I want him to hear those exact words." Evelyn let out a sharp hum of approval. "The banking institutions are fully notified, Zara. Any attempt he makes to access cash will trigger a hard stop. He is currently walking around with zero liquidity. The timing is impeccable. Have a beautiful morning." I ended the call and leaned back against my stool. Somewhere in the city, Derek was about to hit a brick wall at 100 miles per hour. Across town, in the heart of the luxury shopping district, Derek was indeed playing the role of the generous billionaire. He stood inside an exclusive high-security jewelry boutique with Chloe clinging tightly to his arm. The store was a sanctuary of hushed voices, velvet display cases, and security guards wearing tailored suits. Chloe was pointing at a display of diamond tennis necklaces, her eyes wide with unadulterated greed. Derek leaned against the glass counter, projecting the arrogant ease of a man who believed he owned the world. He wanted to reward Chloe for being so patient while he handled the messy details of his impending divorce. He wanted to cement her loyalty with diamonds purchased using my stolen money. "Try the platinum one," Derek instructed, signaling the store manager with a flick of his wrist. "The one with the emerald-cut stones. It will match the aesthetic of the new cabin perfectly." Chloe giggled, a high grating sound that drew annoyed glances from other wealthy patrons. The man, a polished man with silver hair, carefully unlocked the display case and draped the stunning diamond necklace around Chloe's neck. It caught the boutique light, sparkling with aggressive brilliance. The price tag was a cool $45,000. "It is absolutely breathtaking," Chloe breathed, admiring her reflection in the gilded mirror. "Trey could never afford something like this." "You are incredible, Derek." Derek puffed out his chest, soaking in the validation like a dying man drinking water. "We will take it," he told the manager, pulling his heavy metal black card from his designer wallet and tossing it onto the glass counter. "Wrap it up beautifully." The manager smiled politely, picking up the card and walking over to the sleek payment terminal. Derek wrapped his arm around Chloe's waist, whispering promises of future shopping sprees in Paris. He waited for the familiar sound of the receipt printing. Instead, the terminal emitted a sharp negative beep. The manager frowned slightly. He wiped the magnetic strip on his suit jacket and inserted the card again. Another harsh beep echoed through the quiet boutique. The screen flashed a bright red error message. "I apologize, sir," the manager said, his tone perfectly neutral, but noticeably cooler. "The card has been declined. Would you like to try a different form of payment?" Derek scoffed, rolling his eyes at Chloe as if the entire situation was a comedic inconvenience. "It is a fraud alert," he said dismissively. "The bank gets overly cautious when I make large jewelry purchases. Give me a moment." He pulled out a secondary platinum card, a business line of credit he used for corporate expenses. He handed it to the manager with an impatient sigh. "Run this one." The manager inserted the second card. The machine beeped instantly. Declined. The polite smile vanished from the manager's face. "Sir, this card is also declining. In fact, the terminal is displaying a code indicating the account has been forcefully locked by the issuing institution. Do you have another card, or should I return the necklace to the vault?" Chloe turned to look at Derek, his neck. His fragile ego was cracking under the public scrutiny. He snatched both cards back from the manager's hand. "Hold the necklace," Derek snapped, pulling his smartphone from his pocket. "I am calling my private banker right now. This is an absurd system error and someone is going to lose their job over it." He marched away from the display case, striding toward the back corner of the boutique to salvage his pride. He dialed the elite concierge number listed on the back of his black card, tapping his expensive leather shoe aggressively against the marble floor. The automated system recognized his number and routed him directly to a human representative. "This is Derek," he barked into the phone, not waiting for a greeting. "I am standing in a jewelry store and your system just declined 2 of my premium cards. Clear the fraud alert immediately so I can complete my purchase. I do not have time for this incompetence." There was a brief pause on the line. The representative did not offer the usual fawning apologies. "Mr. Derek, please hold for one moment while I access your profile." Derek paced back and forth, glaring at the security guard, who was now watching him closely. 30 seconds passed, then a full minute. Derek's impatience morphed into a sudden, inexplicable knot of anxiety. "Sir," the representative finally returned, their voice completely flat and robotic. "I am looking at your portfolio now. This is not a standard fraud alert. Every single account associated with your profile, including your secondary credit lines, joint savings, and corporate expense accounts, has been permanently frozen." "Frozen?" Derek demanded, his voice rising in volume. "What are you talking about? Unfreeze them. I am a senior wealth manager. Do you know how much money I run through your institution? I cannot unfreeze them, sir," the representative stated coldly. "The directive did not come from our automated security system. The total account lockdown was manually initiated by the primary account holder." Derek stopped pacing. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. "The primary account holder, Zara." "Why would my wife lock the accounts?" Derek asked, his voice losing its arrogant edge, replaced by genuine panic. The representative delivered the final crushing blow. "The accounts were not locked due to a simple dispute, sir. The primary account holder, alongside external legal counsel, has flagged your entire financial portfolio under an active, massive corporate fraud and embezzlement investigation. The funds are legally seized pending federal review. You currently have zero access to any credit or liquid assets. Have a good day." The line went dead. Derek stood frozen in the corner of the luxury boutique, the dial tone ringing in his ear. The heavy black cards in his hand suddenly felt like worthless pieces of trash. He looked across the store. Chloe was watching him, tapping her foot impatiently, waiting for her $45,000 diamond necklace. The illusion of his power was gone. He was completely, utterly broke. The heavy oak front door shuddered violently under the force of a frantic, aggressive pounding. Rosa stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes darting toward the entryway. I raised my hand, signaling her to stand down. I knew exactly who was trying to break the door off its hinges. The shockwaves of my financial lockdown were finally hitting the shoreline. "Open the door, Rosa," I said softly, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. Let the noise in. Rosa unbolted the lock. The door flew open and my older brother Trey stormed into the foyer like a raging bull. His designer suit was rumpled, his face twisted in absolute fury. He marched straight past Rosa, his heavy dress shoes stomping across the hardwood floor, until he stood towering over me at the kitchen island. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "What is wrong with you?" Trey bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Have you completely lost your mind, Zara?" Chloe just called me in tears from the jewelry boutique. She is humiliated. She tried to use the premium concierge card Derek authorized for her interior design expenses, and the bank manager told her the account was frozen due to a massive fraud investigation initiated by you. You locked my wife out of her own funds. I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter. The ceramic clinked sharply against the stone. I looked at my brother. He was sweating, breathing heavily, entirely consumed by the need to protect the white woman who was actively dismantling his life. "That was not her card, Trey." I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "That was a corporate expense account tethered to my primary holding company. I revoked Derek's access to my money. Chloe just became collateral damage." Trey slammed his fist down onto the marble island, rattling my laptop. "Do not play semantics with me. You did this on purpose to punish her. You have always been jealous of Chloe. You have despised her since the day I brought her home. You cannot stand the fact that she is soft, delicate, and requires protection. You look at her and you see everything you are not." Rosa gasped from the corner of the room, but I held up my hand again, silencing her. I wanted Trey to speak. I wanted him to empty his entire toxic arsenal. "You are a bitter, aggressive woman, Zara." Trey sneered, his eyes filled with a disgust that cut deeper than any surgical blade. "You operate like a bulldozer. You emasculate your husband with your endless obsession with control and money. You lack grace. You lack femininity. You are the stereotypical angry black woman who drives good men away because you refuse to be a peaceful, supportive wife. Chloe knows how to make a man feel valued. She knows how to build a home. You just know how to build a bank account, and you use it to hold this entire family hostage." The colorist venom poured from my own brother's lips, weaponizing my dark skin, my ambition, and my independence. He had swallowed my mother's toxic teachings whole. He truly believed his light-skinned blonde wife was the ultimate prize, a fragile treasure that excused his own mediocrity. He looked at me, his biological sister, who was currently bound in surgical tape and bleeding for her empire, and saw only a villain. "Are you finished?" I asked, my tone glacial. Trey scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "Unlock the cards, Zara. Call the bank right now, apologize to Derek, and fix this mess before you permanently destroy your marriage and alienate the rest of this family." I did not reach for my phone to call the bank. Instead, I reached for a thick black leather folder resting on the kitchen island. I slid it across the smooth marble surface until it stopped directly in front of Trey. "I will not be unlocking anything," I stated calmly. "But since you are so invested in financial management and the sanctity of marriage, you should review those ledgers. I ran a forensic trace on the $600,000 you handed over to Derek last month for your logistics company expansion." Trey frowned, his aggressive posture faltering slightly. "What does my business expansion have to do with your petty jealousy?" "Open the folder, Trey," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave. He flipped the leather cover open. Inside were printed banking manifests, routing numbers, and offshore wire transfer receipts. I had highlighted the critical figures in bright yellow marker. Trey stared at the documents, his eyes darting back and forth across the page, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "This shows a transfer of $180,000 being routed to a Cayman Islands account," Trey muttered, tracing the highlighted line with his finger. "Why is Derek sending 30% of my capital to a dummy corporation?" "He is diversifying," I replied coldly. "Or more accurately, he is stealing from you. But do not take my word for it. Let the delicate, graceful woman you love so much explain it to you herself." I opened my laptop and clicked on the audio file Rosa had secured from Derek's briefcase just yesterday. I turned the volume to maximum and hit play. The crisp, clear sound of a locked office door echoed from the laptop speakers. Then came Chloe's high, melodic laugh. The color instantly drained from Trey's face at the sound of his wife's voice in a private room with his brother-in-law. I locked it. Derek's voice filtered through the speakers, dripping with raw intimacy. You look incredible in that dress. Are we celebrating our new real estate acquisition? Trey gripped the edge of the marble island. His knuckles turned stark white. Of course we are celebrating. Chloe's recorded voice rang out harsh and cruel. I just spent the entire morning listening to Trey complain about his new business venture. It is completely suffocating. He talks about expanding his logistics company, but he has no actual liquid capital. He is broke, Derek. He wants to live like a king, but he refuses to understand how real wealth operates. I cannot stand listening to him pretend to be a mogul. Trey staggered backward as if he had been physically struck in the chest. His mouth fell open. The arrogant, condescending brother who had just lectured me about femininity and grace was suddenly gasping for air. The recording continued mercilessly. You do not have to worry about Trey's lack of capital ever again, Derek bragged on the audio. He is a fool playing at business. I am doing exactly what a brilliant financial advisor does. I am diversifying. I created a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands last week. I am currently siphoning 30% of Trey's capital right off the top and funneling it into an offshore account bearing my name. The audio waveform spiked with Chloe's gasp, followed by Derek's chilling laughter. By the time Trey realizes his money is gone, we will be sitting on the deck of our new mountain cabin sipping bourbon and watching the sunset. He is financing our escape, Chloe. He is paying for us to leave him behind. You are a genius, Derek. Chloe laughed a cruel, sharp sound. Trey is going to lose his mind when he finds out. I reached out and paused the recording. The kitchen fell into a suffocating absolute silence. Trey looked like a corpse. His breathing was shallow and rapid. He stared at the laptop screen, his eyes wide and vacant, unable to process the total destruction of his reality. The fragile, perfect white wife he worshipped was sleeping with his sister's husband. She despised him. She thought he was a broke, suffocating failure. And the brother-in-law he respected was actively draining his life savings to buy a romantic getaway cabin for his own wife. I looked at my brother, feeling absolutely no pity. She is delicate, Trey, I said, throwing his own words back at him with lethal precision. She requires protection. She needs a warm, accommodating environment. And apparently she needs my husband and your expansion capital to get it. Trey stumbled backward, knocking into a bar stool. It crashed to the floor with a loud clatter. He did not look at me. He could not meet the eyes of the dark-skinned, strong sister he had just tried to humiliate. He stared at the floor, clutching his chest as a raw, animalistic sob tore through his throat. The illusion of his superiority was shattered into a million jagged pieces, and he was left bleeding on the floor of my kitchen. Get out of my house, I commanded softly. Go handle your delicate wife. Trey turned and bolted for the front door, running like a man whose entire world was currently engulfed in flames. The front door slammed shut, shaking the walls of the house. I picked up my coffee mug and took another sip. The black liquid was completely cold, but it tasted like pure, unadulterated victory. I set the cold coffee mug back down on the marble island. The echo of the slamming front door still lingered in the high ceilings of my foyer, but my attention was already shifting. Trey was a casualty of his own ignorance, a man who chose a fragile aesthetic over loyalty. He was dealing with his shattered reality now. I had to focus on the architects of that reality. Derek and Chloe were currently nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains, playing house in a luxury cabin funded by my stolen wealth. Derek had negotiated early access to the property for the holiday weekend, promising the sellers that his massive wire transfer would clear escrow by Monday morning. He thought he was untouchable. He had no idea I had frozen the escrow account 48 hours ago. But freezing the funds was simply a financial maneuver. I wanted a physical consequence. I wanted them thrown out into the freezing cold. I opened a secure communication channel on my laptop and dialed a private number. It belonged to Marcus, a highly connected real estate fixer who handled the dirty work for commercial developers across state lines. Marcus owed me his career. 5 years ago, I quietly funded his legal defense when a corrupt zoning board tried to bankrupt him. He was fiercely loyal and incredibly efficient. Marcus answered with a crisp greeting. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I need a catastrophic favor in the Blue Ridge district, I stated, sending him the coordinates and property details of Derek's cabin. My husband is currently occupying that estate. He believes he is purchasing it, but the escrow is dead. I reviewed the county land registries last night. The property sits on a disputed commercial zoning line and has two unresolved environmental code violations regarding its septic system and structural foundation. Marcus typed rapidly on his end. The keys clacked loudly through the speaker. I see it, Zara. The previous owner buried the environmental reports to expedite a quick cash sale. Technically, this structure is unfit for residential occupation until those codes are cleared by a county inspector. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the kitchen island. I want the county inspector out there today. I want a red tag on that front door. I want an immediate emergency eviction notice served by the local sheriff. They do not get 30 days. They get 30 minutes to pack their bags and vacate the premises for their own safety. Consider it a done deal, Marcus replied smoothly. I play golf with the county commissioner. For a property with active environmental hazards, we can legally classify it as a severe health risk. I will dispatch a local sheriff and a process server immediately. I will have the server wear a body camera for liability purposes. I will route the live feed directly to your encrypted portal. Enjoy the show, Zara. The line clicked dead. I closed my eyes and allowed a genuine smile to grace my lips. Derek had sought refuge in the mountains, a place he thought was completely isolated from my influence. He underestimated the reach of a woman who built her empire by knowing exactly who owned the ground beneath his feet. 2 hours later, Rosa brought me a fresh bowl of hot soup. I ate slowly, mindful of my surgical wounds, while my eyes remained glued to the laptop screen. A secure video link established a connection. The high-definition feed flickered to life. The camera lens showed the dashboard of a rugged utility vehicle winding its way up a steep, snow-dusted mountain road. The process server was sitting in the passenger seat, riding alongside a uniformed county sheriff. They pulled up to a massive custom-built log cabin surrounded by towering pine trees. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney. It looked like a picturesque holiday postcard. The sheriff and the process server stepped out of the vehicle. Their heavy boots crunched against the gravel driveway. They marched up the wooden steps to the expansive wraparound porch. The sheriff pounded a heavy fist against the solid oak front door. "Police department, open the door." The sheriff commanded, his voice booming over the body camera audio. A minute passed. The door swung open. Derek stood there wearing plush cashmere sweatpants and a silk robe. He held a crystal glass of bourbon in his left hand. His arrogant, relaxed expression instantly evaporated, replaced by deep, visceral confusion. "Is there a problem?" Officer Derek asked, his voice adopting that smooth, authoritative tone he used to manipulate clients. "We are the new owners of this property. We are just enjoying the holiday." "You are not the owners, sir," the sheriff stated flatly, handing Derek a thick stack of legal documents with a bright red warning label stapled to the front. "The escrow on this property has been federally frozen. Furthermore, this structure is currently condemned due to severe environmental and zoning violations. This building is legally classified as a biological hazard. I am serving you with an emergency red tag eviction notice. You have exactly 20 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises." Derek stared at the red tag as if it were written in a foreign language. The glass of bourbon slipped from his hand, shattering against the wooden porch. Amber liquid splashed across his expensive slippers. "This is impossible," Derek stammered, his confident facade completely disintegrating. "I am a senior wealth manager. I wired $250,000 for this property. You cannot throw us out. My wife is inside." Chloe appeared behind him, clutching a plush blanket around her shoulders. Her blonde hair was messy, and her face was pale with sudden panic. "What is going on, Derek? Why are the police here, ma'am? You need to pack your bags immediately," the process server interjected, stepping into the camera frame to hand Chloe a copy of the notice. "This property is condemned. If you are not off this mountain in 20 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing on a hazardous commercial site." Chloe let out a high-pitched shriek. "Arrested, Derek, do something. Call the bank. Call the realtor. You promised me this house was ours." Derek stumbled back into the foyer, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out his mobile phone. He dialed his elite banking concierge, completely forgetting the brutal lesson he had learned at the jewelry store just a few days prior. The phone call went straight to the automated fraud department. His accounts were still permanently locked. He had zero liquid cash. He had no access to credit. I was standing in a condemned building with a screaming mistress and an armed sheriff tapping his watch. "We need to book a hotel," Derek muttered, frantically swiping through his phone with trembling fingers. "I will just book the luxury resort down the mountain. We can sort this out tomorrow." He typed his credit card information into the booking application. The screen flashed a bright red error message. Declined. He tried a second card. Declined. He tried his corporate expense account. Declined. "Derek, book the room." Chloe screamed, her voice echoing shrilly over the body camera feed. "It is freezing outside. Where are we supposed to go?" Derek looked up from his phone, his face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing in quicksand. He looked at the sheriff, he looked at Chloe, then he looked out at the freezing, unforgiving mountain wilderness. "My cards are dead," Derek whispered, the reality of his total financial ruin finally crushing his spirit. "The bank locked everything. We have no money, Chloe. We have nowhere to go." I sat in my warm, quiet living room, watching the stolen paradise completely collapse. Chloe burst into hysterical, angry tears, shoving Derek away as she ran to the bedroom to pack her designer suitcases. Derek stood paralyzed on the porch, a broken, penniless man about to be thrown out into the snow. I reached out and gently closed the laptop. The eviction was an absolute success. The mountain had reclaimed its trash. The weekend passed with the quiet, methodical precision of a ticking time bomb. I remained in my living room, resting my healing body, while Rosa kept a steady supply of hot tea and fresh bandages. I did not care how Derek and Chloe survived the freezing mountain temperatures. My focus was entirely locked on Monday morning. The financial district operated on strict schedules, and I was about to disrupt their entire ecosystem. At exactly 8 in the morning, the stock market opened. I picked up my encrypted phone and sent a single text to Evelyn. "Drop the blade." Evelyn executed the command instantly. A highly secure priority flagged email bypassed the standard firewalls and landed directly in the personal inboxes of the 5 founding billionaires on the board of directors at Vanguard Financial Partners. The payload was devastating. It contained the offshore wiring manifests, the Cayman Islands Dummy Corporation registration, and the crystal-clear audio file of Derek openly bragging to Chloe about stealing client expansion capital. Furthermore, Evelyn attached the official termination of their commercial lease. The legal notice explicitly cited Derek's felony wire fraud as the absolute trigger for the eviction. Across the city, Derek was desperately pulling his vehicle into the underground parking garage of the Vanguard Tower. He had spent the entire weekend sleeping in the passenger seat of his freezing car at a highway rest stop. He and Chloe had survived on a stale bag of pretzels, rationing a half tank of gas just to make it back to the city limits. He looked entirely pathetic. His designer suit was heavily wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and his jaw was covered in coarse, unkempt stubble. Yet he still clung to a delusional sliver of hope. He believed his office was his ultimate sanctuary. He planned to march into his suite, use the unrecorded corporate landlines to bully the bank, and demand an emergency cash advance from his senior partners to secure a hotel. Derek strode into the grand marble lobby of the financial tower, desperately attempting to project his usual arrogant authority. He smoothed his ruined lapels and approached the private executive elevator. He pulled his company badge from his pocket and swiped it against the security scanner. A harsh, sharp beep echoed through the lobby. The scanner blinked a solid red. Access denied. Derek scowled aggressively, slapping the plastic card against the sensor a second time. Another red flash. He turned around, preparing to scream at the front desk receptionist for the technical failure. He never got the chance. The heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom swung open with violent force. 3 senior partners marched into the main lobby, flanked by 4 armed private security contractors wearing heavy tactical gear. The managing partner, A ruthless billionaire named Richard Sterling marched at the front of the pack. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He held a thick manila envelope tightly in his fist. Derek forced a strained smile, stepping forward to greet his boss. Richard, my keycard is malfunctioning. I also have an urgent banking issue I need to discuss with the board regarding a temporary liquid advance. You are finished, Derek. Richard barked, his voice echoing loudly across the cavernous lobby. Everyone in the vicinity stopped and turned to watch. Richard slammed the thick envelope directly against Derek's chest. We received the audio files. We saw the Cayman Islands transfer logs. You stole $600,000 from a client and routed the stolen funds through our highly secure corporate banking portals. Derek's face instantly drained of all color. He opened his mouth, stammering, trying to formulate a lie, but his brain completely short-circuited. He realized instantly that his private conversation with Chloe had been recorded and weaponized. Richard did not give him a second to breathe. Because of your felony fraud, our landlord just triggered the morality clause and terminated our entire corporate lease. You have cost this firm millions of dollars in emergency relocation fees and inflicted irrecoverable reputational damage on our brand. You are terminated effective immediately. We are seizing your pension and your final bonuses to cover the damages. Derek dropped the envelope. The papers spilled across the polished marble floor. Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal, menacing growl. We have already turned your digital footprint over to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Inside that envelope is a formal notice of impending federal charges. You will be facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and embezzlement. If you ever set foot on this property again, these guards have authorization to use physical force to remove you. The armed contractors closed in instantly. They grabbed Derek by his arms, their grips painfully tight. He did not fight back. The absolute shock had completely paralyzed his nervous system. The junior analysts he used to torment the receptionists, he treated like dirt, and the rival managers he constantly belittled all stood in the lobby, watching his utter humiliation. The guards dragged the disgraced wealth manager through the revolving glass doors and tossed him onto the cold, wet pavement of the financial district. His career, his reputation, and his freedom were vaporized in less than 5 minutes. The arrogant king of finance was now a homeless criminal staring down a federal prison sentence. Derek lay shivering on the unforgiving concrete of the financial district, but my mind had already moved on to the next tactical objective. It was the morning of day 8. The sun had barely crested the horizon when a fleet of unmarked, heavy-duty moving trucks rumbled down my quiet suburban street. Their air brakes hissed loudly in the freezing air, signaling the arrival of my private demolition crew. I stood in the foyer, my arms crossed over my thick cashmere sweater, ignoring the dull ache radiating from my healing abdomen. Rosa stood firmly beside me, holding a clipboard and a red marker. The time for physical recovery was over. It was time for the great erasure. A crew of 20 professional movers marched through the front door. I did not hire a standard residential moving company. I hired a specialized commercial liquidation team accustomed to gutting entire office buildings and sprawling estates in a matter of hours. They worked with ruthless mechanical efficiency, asking 0 questions and speaking only in clipped commands. I sat on a sturdy folding stool in the center of the living room, directing the orchestrated chaos with simple, precise gestures. They dismantled the custom leather sectional where Rosa had saved my life just days ago. They unbolted the massive glittering crystal chandeliers from the vaulted ceilings. They stripped the imported Persian rugs from the hardwood floors, rolling them up tightly in thick industrial plastic wrap. I instructed the foreman to leave absolutely nothing of value behind. The expensive Italian espresso machine Derek loved to use every morning to play the role of the refined gentleman was unplugged and boxed up. The state-of-the-art surround sound system he constantly bragged about to his colleagues was ripped directly from the drywall, leaving exposed wires hanging like dead veins. The only items remaining in the entire house were packed into a single, flimsy cardboard box, resting in the dead center of the kitchen floor. It contained Derek's cheap gym shoes, a few outdated financial magazines, and the useless permanently locked credit cards I had deactivated. That pathetic cardboard box represented his entire remaining net worth. The liquidation team headed upstairs with heavy boots. They quickly dismantled the custom king-sized bed frame where Derek had slept while plotting his betrayal. They emptied my massive walk-in closet, carefully packing my designer bags, tailored business suits, and expensive jewelry into secure, lockable steel crates. The house rapidly transformed from a luxurious, perfectly curated estate into a hollow, echoing cavern. The vibrant warmth I had meticulously cultivated over 7 years of marriage was systematically sucked right out the front door, loaded into the back of idling trucks, and driven away to a highly secure, climate-controlled storage facility. Every footstep Rosa and I took now echoed sharply against the bare, stripped walls. By 2 in the afternoon, the physical extraction was completely finished. The moving trucks rolled out of the neighborhood in a single file line, leaving the massive driveway completely empty. I opened my laptop, resting it on the cold, bare stone of the kitchen counter. It was time to execute the digital kill. I accessed the primary utility accounts registered solely under my holding company. With 4 rapid clicks, I terminated the municipal water supply. I canceled the natural gas line. I ordered an immediate remote shutoff of the main electrical grid. The recessed lights above me flickered once and died completely, plunging the large house into heavy gray natural shadows. Next, I pulled up the central interface of our heavily integrated smart home system. Derek loved controlling the environment from his smartphone, adjusting the temperature and lighting to suit his fragile comfort. I executed a hard factory reset, wiping the memory drives completely clean. I manually locked the digital thermostats to their lowest possible setting and then permanently deactivated the local network connection. The house would quickly drop to match the freezing, bitter temperature of the November air outside. It was no longer a home. It was a perfectly designed ice-cold tomb waiting patiently for its occupant to return. A low, powerful engine purred in the driveway, breaking the dead silence of the property. I closed my laptop and slipped it into my leather work bag. Evelyn's black armored SUV idled outside the heavily tinted windows, reflecting the overcast winter sky. Her private driver, a massive man wearing a discreet earpiece, stepped out and opened the rear passenger door. Rosa was already waiting by the car, holding my overnight bag and wrapped in a thick wool coat. I took one final look around the freezing hollow shell of the kitchen. There was no sadness in my chest. There was no lingering nostalgia for the ghost of a dead marriage. There was only the clinical, absolute satisfaction of a flawless demolition. I turned my back on the empty house, walked out the front door, and locked the deadbolt. I did not leave a key under the mat. I slid into the heated leather back seat of the SUV next to Evelyn. Rosa sat comfortably in the front passenger seat. Evelyn did not ask how I was feeling or offer useless emotional platitudes. She simply handed me a sealed manila folder containing the finalized deeds and access codes to my newly reorganized assets. The driver pulled away from the curb, leaving the dead freezing house in the rearview mirror. We drove smoothly through the city traffic, heading straight toward the elite, heavily guarded residential sector downtown. We arrived at a towering skyscraper made of sleek black glass. It was the most impenetrable residential fortress in the city, favored by visiting diplomats and paranoid billionaires. The underground parking garage was secured by biometric scanners and armed guards who required advanced clearance just to lower the barricade. A private direct access elevator shot us up to the top floor. The steel doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a massive, immaculate penthouse suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, commanding view of the entire city landscape. The skyline stretched out below me like a glittering chessboard waiting for my next move. The penthouse was fully furnished, impeccably designed, and already stocked with everything I required to run my empire. The security protocols were absolute and unforgiving. Derek could not enter the lobby without triggering an immediate police response. Trey could not talk his way past the highly trained front desk staff. My mother could not manipulate her way through the reinforced steel doors. I walked over to the towering glass windows, looking down at the tiny, insignificant cars moving through the busy streets below. My healing body ached slightly from the long day, but my spirit felt completely untethered. I had severed the disease-toxic limbs of my past. I was elevated untouchable and firmly seated on my new throne. Let them freeze in the dark. Day 9 began with a brutal, biting wind that mirrored the absolute desolation of Derek's reality. He sat behind the steering wheel of his imported luxury sedan, gripping the leather material so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. The fuel gauge glowed an angry, persistent orange, warning him that the tank was running on mere fumes. He could not pull into a gas station. Every single piece of plastic in his expensive designer wallet was a dead, useless piece of trash. He had spent the previous night shivering in a bleak, unsavory motel parking lot after Chloe had screamed at him, slapped his face, and demanded he fix the catastrophic mess he had dragged her into. He had nothing left to offer her. His career was a smoldering crater. The federal authorities were already circling his reputation like starving vultures. But Derek possessed the dangerous, delusional arrogance of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his entire life. As he navigated the familiar winding roads of his upscale suburban neighborhood, his mind frantically constructed a lifeline. He just needed to reach Zara. She was his ultimate safety net, his loyal, reliable workhorse. He believed she was currently bedridden, recovering from major surgery, and completely isolated from the outside world. He would walk through the front door, fall to his knees, and manufacture a brilliant, tearful lie. He would tell her that a massive, targeted cyber attack had hit his firm, temporarily freezing all their accounts. He would play the devoted, stressed victim. He would kiss her forehead, apologize for his frantic absence, and manipulate her into liquidating her private retirement funds to bail him out. He knew exactly how to play her. He just needed to get inside his warm, comfortable house. The tires of his sedan crunched against the freezing gravel as he pulled into the massive driveway. He threw the car into park and killed the engine, desperate to conserve whatever fuel remained. He stepped out into the freezing November afternoon. The sky overhead was a thick, bruised gray, threatening an imminent winter storm. He marched up the concrete steps to the front porch, adjusting his ruined, wrinkled suit jacket, preparing his facial expression of deep, manufactured distress. He reached for the heavy mahogany door, fully expecting the smart lock to recognize his biometric signature. He pressed his thumb against the digital scanner. The screen remained completely dark. No friendly green light. No mechanical click of the deadbolt retracting. The entire system was dead. Derek frowned, a flicker of genuine irritation breaking through his rehearsed sorrow. He dug into his pocket, retrieved his physical key, and shoved it into the manual lock. The metal turned with a stiff, protesting grind. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped across the threshold, fully prepared to shout a warm, apologetic greeting to his recovering wife. The words died instantly in his throat. A blast of air hit his face. It was not the familiar, welcoming rush of central heating. It was a freezing, dead, bitter cold that felt like stepping directly into an industrial meat freezer. Derek stumbled forward, the heavy oak door swinging shut behind him with a loud final slam that echoed unnaturally through the empty space. The foyer was pitch black. The thick custom velvet curtains he had picked out himself were gone, leaving the massive windows stripped and bare, filtering in only the weak dying light of the overcast afternoon. Derek slammed his hand against the wall, slapping the light switches repeatedly. Nothing happened. The electricity was completely severed. Panic, sharp and jagged, began to claw at his chest. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket, activating the harsh, bright beam of the flashlight application. He swept the white beam across the room. The light illuminated total, absolute devastation. The expensive Persian rugs were missing. The artwork had been stripped from the drywall, leaving behind faint rectangular outlines of dust. He took a few staggering steps into the main living room. The massive custom leather sectional was gone. The crystal chandelier had been unbolted and removed, leaving a gaping black hole in the vaulted ceiling. His state-of-the-art surround sound system had been ripped from the studs, leaving exposed wires dangling limply against the paint. The house was not just empty. It had been systematically, surgically gutted. It was a hollow, echoing shell. Zara. Derek screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. The sound bounced off the bare, freezing walls, mocking his desperation. "Zara, where are you?" He bolted toward the kitchen, his leather shoes slapping loudly against the freezing hardwood floors. He swept the flashlight beam over the massive marble island. The expensive espresso machine was gone. The decorative fruit bowls were gone. Every cabinet door stood wide open, revealing bare, empty shelves. His breath plumed in the freezing air, forming thick white clouds in front of his face. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had expected a warm sanctuary. He had walked into a tomb. Then he heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching sound cutting through the dead silence of the house. Swish, swish, swish. Derek snapped the flashlight beam toward the dining room. The bright circle of light landed on a figure standing in the heavy shadows. It was Rosa. The housekeeper was wearing a thick, heavy wool winter coat, her hands wrapped tightly in worn leather gloves. She held a simple wooden broom. She was calmly, methodically sweeping a small pile of dust across the bare, freezing hardwood floor. She did not flinch when the blinding beam of the flashlight hit her face. She did not stop her rhythmic sweeping. "What are you doing?" Derek gasped, his voice trembling violently. He lowered the flashlight slightly, his mind completely unable to process the surreal, terrifying image before him. Where is all my furniture? Where is the heat? Where is my wife? Rosa paused her sweeping. She leaned her weight against the wooden handle of the broom. She looked at the ruined, pathetic man standing in the center of the gutted room. There was no fear in her dark eyes. There was no subservience. She looked at him with the cold, absolute disgust of a person staring at a crushed insect on the pavement. She did not offer a single word of comfort. She did not show an ounce of pity. She simply stood in the freezing, pitch-black house holding her broom, completely unfazed by his frantic, spiraling panic. Derek took a staggering step forward, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped his phone. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon his shoulders with the weight of a collapsing building. He was not going to manipulate his way out of this. He was not going to play the victim. He had returned to his castle to demand a ransom only to find the kingdom had already been burned to the ground. "Where is my wife?" Derek screamed, his voice shattering the icy stillness of the gutted living room. The sound tore through his throat, raw and panicked, bouncing off the bare drywall. He lunged forward, dropping his smartphone. The device hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack, sending the harsh beam of the flashlight spinning wildly before it settled on the baseboards. The sudden shift in light cast long, distorted shadows across the empty space. Derek ignored the dropped phone. He dropped to his knees. The freezing oak planks offered zero comfort against his bones. He clasped his hands together, his chest heaving as he stared up at the housekeeper. Rosa did not blink. She did not take a single step backward. She stood absolutely still in her heavy winter coat, holding her wooden broom like a sentinel guarding a conquered fortress. She looked down at the weeping, ruined man groveling on the floor. Her dark eyes held nothing but clinical, icy disgust. The arrogant wealth manager who had spent years treating her like an invisible servant was now begging her for answers in the dark. "Where is she?" Rosa. Derek begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "I need to talk to her. I can explain everything. The bank locked my accounts. The police threw me out of the cabin. My partners fired me. I have nothing. I need my wife. Please tell me where she is." Rosa slowly lowered her broom, leaning the wooden handle against the bare wall. She turned her back on him and walked with measured, unhurried steps toward the center of the kitchen. Her boots clicked sharply against the stone tiles. Derek watched her from his knees, his breath forming thick white clouds in the freezing air, desperate for any lifeline. Rosa bent down and picked up the single, flimsy cardboard box, resting in the middle of the empty room. She carried it back to the living room, stopping exactly 2 feet away from his kneeling form. Without a single word, Rosa extended her arms and tossed the cardboard box directly at his feet. It hit the hardwood floor with a heavy, definitive thud. The folded cardboard flaps popped open upon impact. Derek scrambled forward on his hands and knees like a starving animal. He reached into the box with shaking, freezing fingers. He pulled out his cheap gym shoes, a stack of outdated financial magazines, and the useless deactivated credit cards he had left on his dresser. He threw them aside, frantically digging deeper into the box until his hands struck a thick, heavy stack of legal folders wrapped in a thick rubber band. Derek yanked the rubber band free. He opened the first folder. The thick premium bond paper bore the unmistakable, terrifying letterhead of Evelyn's corporate law firm. It was a petition for the absolute dissolution of marriage. There was no request for mediation. There was no offer to negotiate. It was a unilateral declaration of total severance. Zara was invoking the ironclad prenuptial agreement he had foolishly signed 7 years ago, back when he arrogantly assumed he would never need it, because she would never leave him. The documents demanded zero spousal support, total retention of all her corporate and personal assets, and an immediate severing of all joint liabilities. Zara was cutting him off with surgical precision. Derek gasped, his hands trembling so violently the heavy papers rattled in the quiet room. He shoved the divorce decree aside and opened the second folder. It was a civil lawsuit filed in federal court. Zara was suing him for the stolen $250,000. The filing explicitly detailed his fraudulent use of her digital signature to forge a power of attorney and leverage the marital home. The lawsuit demanded full financial restitution plus severe punitive damages. It included a legal injunction freezing his future earning potential for the rest of his natural life until the debt was paid in full. Howe was looking at a financial death sentence. She was ensuring he would never legally own a single dime again. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, freezing instantly in the bitter air. He ripped open the third and final binder. It was the thickest of them all. The cover page read Forensic Audit and Evidentiary Disclosures. Derek felt his heart stop completely. He flipped the heavy pages, his eyes darting frantically across the black ink. He saw bank routing numbers. He saw offshore account details. He saw the exact registration data, timestamps, and authorized signatures of his Cayman Islands dummy corporation. Zara had tracked every single stolen penny of Trey's investment capital. She had completely mapped out his embezzlement scheme. She had handed the exact blueprint of his crimes to his billionaire partners, ensuring his total destruction. But the final pages of the audit broke his mind completely. Attached to the back of the financial logs was a printed transcript. Derek stared at the words, his breath catching painfully in his lungs. He read his own quotes. He read the exact, intimate conversation he had with Chloe in his locked office just yesterday. He read his arrogant bragging about stealing Trey's money to fund their romantic escape. Zara had recorded him. She had heard every single vile, treacherous word while she was bleeding from her surgical wounds. The realization hit him with the force of a falling building. Zara was never the oblivious, reliable workhorse he thought she was. She was the apex predator. She had orchestrated his eviction, his firing, his financial ruin, and his public humiliation in a matter of days, completely undetected. She had smiled at him through a video screen while sharpening the blade that would cut his head off. Derek dropped the heavy binder. It hit the floor pages, spilling out around his knees. He wrapped his arms around his own torso, rocking back and forth as a raw, guttural sob tore its way out of his throat. He had played a dangerous game with a woman who owned the entire casino. He was completely, utterly destroyed. He had no money, no career, no home, and he was facing federal prison. Rosa stood above him, watching the arrogant man weep on the freezing floor. She pulled her thick wool coat tighter around her shoulders. She looked down at the ruined traitor who had tried to destroy the woman who fed him. She did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. The boss said the trash stays exactly where it belongs, Rosa stated, her voice slicing through the freezing air with lethal, unforgiving precision. She turned her back on him, walking straight toward the front door. She stepped out into the freezing November night and pulled the heavy mahogany door shut behind her. The deadbolt clicked into place with a loud final snap. Derek was left completely alone in the pitch-black freezing house, kneeling in the dark, surrounded by the legal documents that dictated his total annihilation. The cold seeped directly into his bones, and no one was ever coming to save him. The cold steering wheel bit into Derek's palms as he navigated blindly through the sleet-slicked streets. His mind was spinning out of control, replaying the devastating financial audit, the frozen accounts, and the absolute humiliation of being tossed out onto the pavement by security guards at his former office. He had nowhere left to run, no remaining friends to call, and absolutely zero cash in his pocket. In his spiraling panic, only one destination remained: Chloe's house. He pulled his luxury sedan into the circular driveway of the affluent suburban home Trey owned. The house was dark except for a single harsh light glowing in the front window. Derek slammed his car door shut, his breath pluming in the freezing air, and marched toward the front entrance. He raised his hand to pound frantically on the heavy oak door, but before his knuckles could make contact, the door swung wide open. Trey stood framed in the doorway. His usually polished appearance was entirely gone. His tie was torn loose, his eyes were bloodshot and hollow, and his hands trembled with a lethal, uncontrollable rage. He did not look like the brother-in-law who had once trusted Derek with his life savings. He looked like a predator backed into a corner. Derek stuttered, stumbling back a half step under Trey's murderous glare. "Trey, man, listen to me. We need to talk. Everything is a massive misunderstanding." Trey did not speak. He lunged forward with explosive speed, grabbing Derek by the expensive silk collar of his ruined suit. With a surge of raw, primal strength fueled by days of agonizing betrayal, Trey dragged Derek off the porch and threw him hard against the side of his parked sedan. The impact knocked the wind completely out of Derek's lungs. "You son of a bitch!" Trey hissed, his voice cracking with a mixture of grief and homicidal fury. "You stole my expansion capital. You stole $600,000 of my hard-earned money to buy a mountain cabin for my wife." Derek gasped for air, clawing frantically at Trey's hands, trying to invent a lie on the spot. "I invested it, Trey. It was a high-risk portfolio maneuver. The market crashed. I was trying to make you richer." "You lying piece of trash!" Trey roared, rearing back his fist and driving it straight into Derek's jaw. The sickening crunch of bone echoing through the driveway was followed by Derek collapsing onto the frozen asphalt, spitting a mouthful of blood onto the concrete. Before Derek could scramble away, the front door flew open again, and Chloe appeared in the doorway wrapped in a silk bathrobe, her face pale with panic. "Trey, stop it!" Chloe screamed, rushing down the steps. "You are going to kill him! Call the police!" Trey spun around, releasing Derek, and fixed his wife with a stare so venomous it physically forced Chloe to halt in her tracks. He pointed a shaking, bloodied finger at her. "Shut up, Chloe!" Trey snarled, his voice trembling violently. "Just shut your lying, manipulative mouth. I listened to the audio files. I heard every single word you and your precious boyfriend exchanged in his office. You think I am a joke. You think I am a broke, suffocating failure funding your expensive lifestyle while you spread your legs for my brother-in-law." Chloe's expression shifted instantly from panic to calculated defense. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder, attempting to salvage her innocence with her usual weaponized fragility. "Trey, you are blowing this completely out of proportion. Derek forced himself on me. He manipulated me using his corporate power. I was just trying to protect our family's stability." "You are a disgusting liar." Derek groaned from the pavement, wiping blood from his split lip as he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. "She begged me for this house, Trey. She initiated the affair. She told me you were financially pathetic and pathetic in every other way. She was the one pushing to drain your account so we could run away together." Chloe's jaw dropped in absolute shock as Derek turned on her to save his own skin. "You absolute coward!" she shrieked, lunging forward to scratch at Derek's face. "You promised me we were leaving together. You promised me a new life. Get away from me, you gold-digging parasite!" Derek yelled, shoving Chloe backward so hard she tripped over her own slippers and hit the ground. Trey watched the two creatures he had loved and trusted tear each other apart right in front of his eyes. The toxic alliance built on greed, deceit, and racial superiority had finally imploded into violent chaos. Trey did not try to help Chloe up. He turned around, marched inside the house, and returned a second later, carrying a massive, heavy designer suitcase belonging to his wife. With a cold, dead look in his eyes, Trey hurled the heavy suitcase down the front steps, sending it crashing into the driveway right beside Chloe. "You are done, Chloe." Trey said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am filing for an immediate fault-based divorce tomorrow morning. Every single credit card in your name is locked. Every luxury vehicle is registered to my corporate holding company, and you are not getting a single dime of my remaining assets. Get out of my house right now." Chloe scrambled to her feet, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated terror as she realized her golden ticket had vanished forever. "Trey, you cannot do this to me." You need me. I don't need a snake in my bed, Trey shouted, pointing out toward the street. Walk away before I forget myself and call the police. Sobbing hysterically, her designer robe dragging through the frozen slush. Chloe realized her reign of manipulation was officially over. She turned and began stumbling down the dark suburban driveway, with nothing more than the clothes on her back. Derek watched her go from his position on the asphalt, realizing with crushing finality that he had lost his mistress, his money, and his safety net, all in one catastrophic night. The sterile, heavily air-conditioned atmosphere of the federal family courthouse provided the perfect backdrop for a financial slaughter. I sat at the polished mahogany plaintiff table, my posture perfectly straight, my hands resting calmly on my lap. The physical pain from my surgical wounds had faded into a dull, manageable ache, replaced entirely by the sharp, intoxicating adrenaline of impending victory. Beside me sat Evelyn. She wore a tailored crimson suit that commanded absolute authority in the austere room. She was not reviewing her notes. She did not need to. She was simply watching our prey sweat. Across the center aisle sat Derek. He was a pathetic hollow ghost of the arrogant wealth manager who had once paraded around my house. The bespoke Italian suits he used to wear were gone, replaced by a slightly wrinkled off-the-rack jacket that hung loosely on his rapidly shrinking frame. The fading yellowish bruise on his jawline served as a permanent reminder of his violent driveway encounter with my brother. Derek kept his eyes glued to the floor, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a cheap plastic pen. Beside him sat his legal counsel. Derek had been completely locked out of his corporate funds and stripped of his high-end connections. As a result, he had been forced to hire a discount sleazy attorney who looked like he operated out of a strip mall basement. The man was sweating profusely, frantically shuffling through disorganized stacks of paper, clearly intimidated by the sheer presence of Evelyn sitting across from him. Judge Morrison, a stern, unforgiving man, with a reputation for despising white-collar criminals, entered the courtroom. The heavy wooden doors sealed shut behind him, locking us all inside the arena. The bailiff called the room to order, and the final stage of Derek's destruction officially commenced. Your Honor, my client is entitled to 50% of the marital estate. The sleazy attorney began standing up and aggressively pointing a finger in my direction. We have recently uncovered evidence that the plaintiff has been hiding a massive, highly lucrative commercial real estate portfolio under a network of anonymous shell companies. My client was kept completely in the dark regarding these assets during their 7-year marriage. Since this wealth was accumulated while they were legally wed, my client demands an equitable division of all corporate holdings, as well as immediate spousal support, due to his recent unjust termination from his employment. The sheer audacity of the demand echoed through the high ceilings of the courtroom. Derek actually had the nerve to try and steal half of the empire I built, after he had already attempted to leave me homeless and bleeding. He wanted my money to save him from the poverty he had created for himself. Judge Morrison peered over his reading glasses, his expression completely unreadable. He looked at Evelyn. Counselor, how does the plaintiff respond to these claims of hidden marital assets? Evelyn stood up slowly. She did not raise her voice. She did not point fingers. She operated with the lethal, quiet precision of a sniper. Your Honor, the defense is relying on a fundamental, embarrassing misunderstanding of corporate law and basic reading comprehension. Evelyn stated, her voice slicing through the silent courtroom. She picked up a single heavily bound document and walked it directly to the judge's bench. The assets in question are not hidden, nor are they marital property. My client is the sole proprietor of Apex Holdings LLC. This corporate entity was funded by a private, non-commingled trust established prior to the marriage. Evelyn turned slightly, casting a dangerous, mocking glance at Derek's sweating lawyer. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client and the defendant signed a comprehensive ironclad prenuptial agreement 7 years ago. Section 4, Paragraph 9, explicitly carves out any and all commercial real estate ventures, shell companies and LLCs registered solely under my client's name. The defendant voluntarily waived all rights to these assets in perpetuity. The document was notarized, witnessed, and signed by the defendant of his own free will. He is entitled to absolutely nothing. Derek's head snapped up. His eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. He had completely forgotten about the prenuptial agreement. He had been so young, so arrogant, and so confident in his ability to manipulate me that he had signed the paperwork years ago without ever bothering to read the fine print. His cheap lawyer frantically flipped through his disorganized files, searching for a loophole that simply did not exist. But we are not here today to solely discuss the enforcement of a prenuptial agreement. Evelyn continued seamlessly shifting the momentum to deliver the fatal blow. We are here to discuss felony theft against the marital estate. Evelyn walked back to our table and retrieved a thick red folder. She approached the bench again, sliding the documents toward Judge Morrison. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, while my client was unconscious on a surgical table, having a tumor, removed the defendant initiated a massive unauthorized wire transfer. He drained $250,000 from their joint savings account. He routed those funds to a real estate escrow account to purchase a luxury cabin for his mistress. The courtroom atmosphere turned incredibly heavy. Judge Morrison flipped open the red folder, his eyes scanning the highlighted banking manifests and offshore routing numbers. His jaw tightened into a hard, unforgiving line. Evelyn did not give them a single second to breathe. To finance the remaining balance of this illicit property, the defendant deliberately committed identity theft. He forged my client's digital signature to create a fraudulent power of attorney, leveraging her primary residence as collateral for the loan. Under the clean hands doctrine of family law, a spouse who actively commits felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and forgery against the marital estate instantly forfeits any right to equitable relief or spousal support. He did not just violate his marriage vows, Your Honor. He violated federal banking laws. Derek sank lower into his wooden chair, looking as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked from his lungs. His sleazy lawyer had stopped shuffling his papers. The man stood completely frozen, staring at the floor, realizing he was defending a man who was actively sinking into a legal abyss. He had absolutely no defense against documented, irrefutable federal fraud. Judge Morrison closed the red folder with a sharp, definitive slap. He looked down at Derek, his eyes burning with absolute chilling disgust. Mr. Derek, the judge, boomed, his voice radiating pure authority. I have presided over this family court for 2 decades. I have seen infidelity, and I have seen greed. But the calculated sociopathic nature of your financial crimes is truly astounding. You attempted to render your recovering wife destitute to finance an affair. You committed forgery to leverage her home. Your sense of entitlement is sickening. The judge raised his gavel. I hereby deny the defendant's motion for spousal support in its entirety. The prenuptial agreement is upheld, and the plaintiff retains 100% of her corporate and personal assets. Furthermore, I am ordering the defendant to repay the stolen $250,000 immediately alongside the entirety of the plaintiff's legal fees. Derek gasped, burying his face in his trembling hands. He had no money. He had no job. $250,000 in court-ordered restitution was an inescapable financial death sentence. But Judge Morrison was not finished. Given the overwhelming documented evidence of wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny presented in this courtroom today, I am legally obligated to escalate this matter. I am forwarding this entire case file, including the banking manifests and the forged power of attorney, directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down onto the sounding block. The loud, sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. 2 armed court officers immediately stepped forward from the back of the room, moving swiftly toward the defense table. They flanked Derek on both sides, instructing him to stand up. He was not free to leave. He was being detained for questioning regarding the federal fraud charges. Derek stood up slowly on shaking legs. The cheap suit hung off his ruined frame. He turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy. He was silently begging me to save him, begging me to call off the executioner. I sat perfectly still at the mahogany table. I looked at the man who had promised to love me, the man who had abandoned me in a hospital to go buy marble countertops with my brother's wife. I did not blink. I did not frown. I simply stared back at him with the cold, unfeeling detachment of a woman looking at a stranger. I offered him absolutely nothing. Evelyn snapped her briefcase shut. She turned to me and offered a fierce, victorious nod. The war in this courtroom was over. I stood up, adjusted the collar of my pristine wool coat, and walked out through the heavy double doors, leaving Derek drowning in the inescapable brutal consequences of his own treason. 2 days after the devastating gavel strike, in Judge Morrison's courtroom, the federal authorities released Derek on a temporary, highly restrictive bail pending a grand jury indictment. He had surrendered his passport, frozen his remaining meager assets, and strapped a heavy restrictive tracking monitor to his ankle. He was a dead man walking desperately searching for a miracle to resurrect his vaporized life. I sat in the heated plush leather back seat of my armored SUV, Silas. My head of personal security navigated the massive vehicle down the steep, winding concrete ramp into the subterranean parking vault beneath my penthouse tower. The heavy steel barricades clamped shut behind us with a loud mechanical thud. The underground facility was a fortress of harsh fluorescent lights, thick concrete pillars, and absolute exclusivity. I was reviewing the quarterly projections for my newly acquired commercial properties on my tablet. The physical pain from my surgery was completely gone, replaced by the relentless driving energy of a woman who had successfully burned her enemies to ash. Silas steered the SUV toward my private reserved parking bay near the VIP elevator bank. Suddenly, a chaotic blur of motion erupted from the deep shadows of a concrete support column. A frantic, disheveled figure sprinted directly into the path of the moving vehicle. Silas slammed his heavy boot onto the brake pedal. The massive tires shrieked violently against the polished concrete, bringing the heavy SUV to a jolting, aggressive halt just inches away from the intruder. The man threw his entire body weight onto the hood of my car. It was Derek. He looked completely feral. The bespoke Italian suits were gone, replaced by a filthy, stained gray hoodie and sweatpants. He had not shaved in days. His face was gaunt, his eyes were manic and bloodshot, and the dark purple bruise on his jawline from my brother's punch had settled into a sickly yellow hue. He scrambled off the hood, his hands frantically slapping against the metal exterior, and threw himself against my rear passenger window. He pressed his face flat against the thick, bulletproof glass. His breath fogged the window. He began pounding his fists against the reinforced pane, but the heavy armor reduced his frantic strikes to a dull, muffled thudding. "Zara, please," I could barely hear his muffled screams penetrating the thick glass. "You have to talk to me. You have to listen to me. I have absolutely nothing left. The feds took my last bank account. They froze my retirement. I am sleeping in a homeless shelter." I kept my hands resting calmly on my tablet. I did not flinch. I did not reach for the window switch to lower the glass. I simply turned my head and looked at him. Derek interpreted my gaze as an invitation to plead for his worthless life. He pressed both hands against the window, tears streaming down his face, mixing with sweat and dirt. "It was Chloe," Derek screamed, his face contorted in pure pathetic desperation. "She manipulated me, Zara. You know how she is. You know how entitled she acts. She used her tears and her blonde hair to brainwash me. She convinced me I needed to provide a luxury lifestyle to prove my worth. She played on my insecurities as a black man in a corporate world. I was under a spell. She seduced me and demanded that cabin. She demanded the money. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Zara. You are my real wife. We built a life together. You have to drop the civil lawsuit. I cannot even afford a public defender for the fraud charges. They are going to lock me in a federal cage for 20 years. Please just show me a shred of mercy." His words were a pathetic, disgusting display of cowardice. The man who had proudly abandoned me on a surgical table to go buy marble countertops with a privileged white woman was now using his race and her manipulation as a cheap shield to avoid accountability. He took absolutely zero responsibility for forging my signature, stealing my money, and violating our marriage vows. He was perfectly willing to throw Chloe under the bus the exact second she was no longer a glittering prize. I sat in the quiet, temperature-controlled luxury of the SUV. I stared right through him. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I did not feel sadness, pity, or vindication. I felt absolute chilling zero. He was a ghost haunting a parking garage. He was a dead insect pressed against my window. The emotional cord that had once tethered my heart to his existence was completely severed, cauterized by the fires of my own survival. He meant absolutely nothing to me. I reached forward and pressed the intercom button located on the center console, establishing a direct audio link to the driver's seat. Silas, I said, my voice echoing with flat clinical detachment. Remove this obstruction from my vehicle. Have the building security scrub the perimeter. I do not want stray animals wandering around my parking bay. Understood, ma'am, Silas replied instantly. Silas threw the driver's door open and stepped out into the harsh fluorescent light of the garage. At the exact same moment, 3 heavily armed building security guards sprinted around the corner, having spotted the breach on the surveillance monitors. Derek saw the men approaching and panicked. He slapped the glass one last time, leaving dirty handprints on the pristine window. "Zara, do not do this!" Derek shrieked, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical sob. "You promised to love me for better or for worse. You cannot just throw me away." Silas grabbed Derek by the back of his filthy hoodie, violently yanking him away from my vehicle. The 3 security guards immediately swarmed the disgraced wealth manager, tackling him aggressively to the cold concrete floor. Derek kicked and thrashed wildly, screaming my name over and over again. The guards pinned his arms behind his back, securing his wrists with heavy plastic zip ties. They hoisted him to his feet, treating him exactly like the trespassing criminal he was. As they dragged him away toward the holding cell in the security office, Derek twisted his neck, locking his manic, bloodshot eyes with mine through the glass one final time. He was crying, begging silently for a savior that no longer existed. I did not break eye contact. I held his gaze with a dead, unblinking stare until the heavy steel doors of the security sector slammed shut behind him, swallowing his screams entirely. The garage fell completely silent. Silas walked around the front of the SUV, inspecting the hood for any scratches or dents. Finding none, he returned to the driver's seat and closed the door. He shifted the vehicle back into drive and smoothly pulled into my private reserved parking bay. I picked up a microfiber cloth from the center console, lowered the window just an inch, and handed it to Silas. "Wipe the handprints off the glass before you park, Silas," I instructed, my eyes already returning to the commercial acquisition files glowing on my tablet. "I do not want any permanent stains on my property." The execution was absolute. The beggar had been purged, and my fortress remained entirely impenetrable. I stepped out of the armored SUV, the heavy steel doors of the parking vault locking into place behind me. Silas escorted me directly to the private elevator. The brushed steel panels slid shut, blocking out the last lingering memory of Derek groveling on the concrete floor. As the elevator shot upward toward the penthouse, I felt a profound physical lightness settling into my bones. The surgical wounds on my abdomen throbbed, but it was the dull, fading ache of a battle already won. I stepped into the foyer of my pristine sanctuary. Rosa was waiting for me, holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea on a silver tray. I took the porcelain cup, offering her a nod of silent gratitude, and walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the freezing city. My encrypted phone began to vibrate violently against the marble surface of the kitchen island. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim room. It was my mother. I let the phone vibrate. The buzzing stopped only to restart a fraction of a second later. It was a relentless, frantic pattern. The desperation was palpable, radiating through the digital signal. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, feeling the warmth slide down my throat, and walked back to the counter. I pressed the green button, activating the speakerphone feature, but I did not offer a greeting. I simply listened to the chaos unfolding on the other end of the line. A loud, hysterical sobbing erupted from the device. "Zara, you have to help us right now," my mother shrieked. Her voice was completely devoid of her usual commanding arrogance. She sounded like a woman drowning. "Everything is destroyed. The police arrested Trey an hour ago. They dragged him out of the house in handcuffs right in front of all the neighbors. He nearly beat Derek to a pulp in the driveway, and Chloe is pressing domestic assault charges. The judge set the bail at $50,000, and the defense attorneys are demanding a massive retainer before they even look at the case. We have no liquid cash, Zara. I tried to use the black card and the bank told me the account was frozen. You have to wire the funds to the precinct immediately." Your brother is sitting in a holding cell like a common criminal. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her demands, my father snatched the phone away. His voice shook with a sickening mixture of panic and deep social shame. Zara, listened to me closely. The country club members are already talking. The news about Derek getting fired by his billionaire partners for federal fraud is leaking everywhere. Chloe is calling all of our family friends, playing the innocent victim, and telling everyone Trey is a violent broke failure who abused her. Our entire social standing is evaporating by the second. We need you to cover Trey's legal fees and release the hold on the family trust accounts. We must hire a top-tier crisis management firm to control the narrative before we are completely ruined in this city. I stood perfectly still, letting their frantic self-serving pleas fill the quiet airspace of my kitchen. I listened closely for a single word of apology. I waited for a single question regarding my physical recovery from major surgery. I waited for them to acknowledge that the man my brother assaulted was the very same husband who had abandoned me on a surgical table. Nothing came. They were watching their golden boy face the brutal consequences of his own blind ignorance, and their immediate instinct was to demand my hidden wealth to save their fragile social reputation. They wanted the dark-skinned, reliable workhorse to step up and finance a rescue mission for a son who had insulted my very existence just days prior. I set my teacup down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the stone. "I am not wiring a single cent," I stated, my voice echoing with a flat, terrifying calm. "I am not posting bail. I am not hiring attorneys." Trey made his choices. He chose to worship a manipulative, privileged white woman who openly despised our bloodline. He chose to blindly hand his business capital over to an embezzler without reading the contracts. He chose to let his anger dictate his actions in the driveway instead of handling his divorce like a rational adult. Those choices carry a heavy, inescapable price tag. It is time he pays the bill. "But you have millions," my mother screamed, her desperation morphing rapidly back into toxic entitlement. "You cannot just leave your own brother to rot in a county jail cell. We are your family, Zara. We gave you life. You owe us." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I replied, my tone dropping to a lethal quiet register. "I paid my debt in full when I spent my entire adult life financing your luxury vehicles, your country club memberships, and Trey's failing business ventures. I bought your affection, and the moment I was bleeding on a surgical table, you demanded more. You supported the woman sleeping with my husband because her blonde hair and fragile aesthetic mattered more to you than your own daughter's survival. Family is supposed to provide a sanctuary. You provided a slaughterhouse." I opened my laptop, pulling up the master control panel for the financial trust accounts I had established for my parents years ago. I selected the primary routing protocol connecting their bank to my holding company. I clicked the red termination button. The pipeline was instantly severed. I just permanently closed the family trust. I informed them, feeling a profound, intoxicating weight lift off my chest. I revoked the deeds to your vacation homes. The monthly allowances are officially terminated. You will have to figure out how to pay your own mortgages and fund your own legal battles from now on. I am officially resigning from the position of the family mule. I am choosing my peace and my sanity over the crushing weight of your toxic obligations. "You cannot do this to us!" my father yelled, his voice cracking with pure terror. "We will lose everything we built. We will have nothing left." "You already lost everything the moment you chose Chloe over me," I replied simply. I tapped the screen and disconnected the call. I immediately blocked their numbers, erased their contact profiles from my network, and instructed Silas to deny them entry to any building I owned. The toxic bloodline was completely, permanently purged. I walked back to the window, looking out over the glittering city skyline. The storm had finally passed, leaving the night air crisp and clear. I was entirely alone, and I had never felt more powerful. I stood perfectly still against the reinforced glass of my penthouse balcony, watching the city lights blink against the vast dark canvas of the winter sky. 6 months had passed since the night I severed the final decaying branch of my family tree. The frigid air whipped around my bare shoulders, but I did not shiver. The surgical incision that had once threatened to tear my body apart on my cold kitchen counter had fully healed into a thin, pale silver scar across my abdomen. It was no longer a painful reminder of vulnerability. It was a battle wound, a permanent insignia of the exact moment I chose to stop bleeding for people who only wanted to drain my life force. My physical recovery had perfectly mirrored my financial expansion. Without the massive draining anchor of Derek and his lavish, fraudulent facade weighing me down, my commercial real estate portfolio had exploded in value. I recently acquired 3 new corporate towers in the financial district, expanding my invisible empire into an undeniable towering fortress. I did not just own the buildings where arrogant men in tailored suits worked. I dictated the very ground they walked on. The ashes of my enemies had scattered into the wind exactly as I had orchestrated. Derek pleaded guilty to multiple counts of federal wire fraud and embezzlement to avoid a lengthy, humiliating, and highly public trial. He was currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. He had absolutely zero visitors. His billionaire former partners had aggressively sued him for corporate defamation and sabotage, ensuring that whatever pennies he earned, scrubbing cafeteria trays behind bars, would be immediately garnished for the rest of his pathetic life. The man who had abandoned me to buy a luxury cabin was now confined to an 8 by 10 concrete cell. Chloe lost everything she had schemed so hard to acquire. Trey's ruthless divorce proceedings, backed by the audio evidence I had provided anonymously to his legal team, stripped her of her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles, and her coveted social standing. She attempted to find another wealthy benefactor, but the scandal of her affair and the sheer brutality of her eviction made her radioactive in the city's elite circles. She was last seen working as a hostess at a low-tier chain restaurant on the outskirts of the suburbs, utterly stripped of the white privilege and weaponized fragility she had previously used against me. But Trey did not emerge victorious either. His violent assault charge stuck, resulting in a hefty financial penalty and strict probation. His logistics company collapsed entirely under the weight of his own financial illiteracy and Derek's offshore siphoning. My parents were forced to downsize to a tiny, unremarkable apartment in a neighboring state, unable to bear the severe social exile they faced when their country club friends learned they had participated in the attempted theft of my inheritance. They were completely erased from polite society, left to bitterly argue with each other in a cramped, dark living room, completely devoid of the golden child they had sacrificed me to protect. They had bet their entire future on a fragile illusion and lost spectacularly. I stepped back into the soothing warmth of the penthouse, letting the heavy glass door slide shut behind me. Rosa was standing in the immaculate kitchen, humming softly to herself as she arranged a fresh bouquet of white lilies on the marble island. Silas stood near the private elevator bank, reviewing the evening security logs with his usual unwavering vigilance. I looked at the two of them. They were not connected to me by DNA. We did not share a bloodline, a last name, or a complicated, toxic childhood history. But when I was bleeding on a sofa, abandoned and broken, Rosa had taped my flesh back together. When a desperate, screaming traitor had thrown himself at my car window, Silas had ripped him away without a single second of hesitation. They were my true family. I paid them a generous salary, but their fierce loyalty had been entirely voluntary. They protected the woman, not just the paycheck. I poured myself a single glass of vintage red wine, the rich, dark liquid swirling smoothly against the crystal. I raised the glass in a silent toast to the quiet, empty perfection of my sanctuary. Society conditions women, especially black women, to be the eternal mules of the earth. We are taught from birth to endure blatant disrespect, to finance the fragile egos of mediocre men, and to sacrifice our own sanity on the altar of family obligation. We are brainwashed into believing that walking away from a toxic marriage or a parasitic bloodline is a shameful, humiliating failure. But standing here at the absolute pinnacle of the city I had conquered, I knew the brutal, undeniable truth. Blood does not make a family. Loyalty, protection, and mutual respect do. A woman's ultimate, impenetrable armor is not her beauty, her patience, or her capacity to forgive those who repeatedly harm her. Her absolute armor is her financial independence. Money is not just a currency used to buy luxury goods. It is a loaded weapon, a heavy shield, and a thick iron door that you can slam shut in the face of your abusers. Walking away from toxicity is not a failure, it is the ultimate, resounding victory. If you have ever had to walk away from people who took your loyalty for granted, share your story in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories of women taking back their power. See you in the next one. Society conditions women to sacrifice their sanity for family obligation. However, blood does not define a family. True family is built entirely on loyalty, protection, and mutual respect. A woman's ultimate armor against toxic manipulation is her financial independence. Money provides a thick iron door to permanently shut out abusers. Walking away from a parasitic bloodline is never a failure. It is a profound, hard-earned victory. If you have ever walked away from people who took your loyalty for granted, share your story in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories of women taking back their power.